Silently, a tale unfolds, inviting contemplation of ancient Greece and its profound narratives. As the ambient light softens and the day's clamor recedes, an immersive journey into a bygone era commences. Envision traversing the sun-drenched hills of ancient Corinth on a balmy evening, roughly 2.5 millennia ago. The gentle Mediterranean zephyr carries the subtle perfume of olive groves, mingling with the distant murmur of waves caressing the rugged coastline. Your path leads towards the royal abode of King Sisyphus, though at this juncture, the monumental and indeed arduous destiny awaiting this monarch remains an untold secret. As the surroundings grow dim, perhaps with a soft, cooling breeze, providing a subtle background hum, the narrative truly begins. The eternal struggle of Sisyphus, perpetually pushing a colossal boulder uphill, is a consequence yet to unfold. In the unfolding moments of this chronicle, he remains a vibrant sovereign, presiding over the flourishing metropolis of Corinth. Yet, even in his prosperity, a unique predicament shadows his reign. A challenge many rulers might envy, an intellect so sharp it borders on self-sabotage. For Sisyphus has unearthed a profound secret, a truth traditionally beyond the grasp of mortals. He has deciphered the very mechanism of cheating death. But to fully grasp the enormity of this discovery, one must begin at the genesis of his extraordinary tale. Imagine yourself as a denizen of Corinth during Sisyphus's influential rule. Each dawn awakens you to the vibrant symphony of merchants establishing their stalls in the bustling agora, the city's central marketplace. The comforting aroma of freshly baked bread intertwines with the saline tang carried inland from the harbor. Daily, vessels arrive, laden with exquisite pottery from Athens, opulent silks from distant, fabled lands, and captivating narratives brought by intrepid travelers who have journeyed across the known world. Your sovereign, King Sisyphus, is renowned throughout the Hellenic world for 3 distinguishing traits. Firstly, his intellect is legendary, so acutely perceptive that whispers suggest he might even outmaneuver the Olympian deities themselves. Secondly, under his astute leadership, Corinth has blossomed into one of the most affluent and influential city-states in all of Greece. And thirdly, well, his integrity is not always pristine, yet his subtle deceptions often paradoxically benefit his subjects, leading to a general consensus of quiet approval rather than overt complaint. One might observe Sisyphus in the early hours, striding through the city's thoroughfares with a deliberate, unhurried gait. Unlike other monarchs, he exhibits no haste. Instead, his gaze is keenly observant of every detail: the meticulous arrangement of wares by merchants, the efficient loading of ships at the bustling harbor, the preferred routes taken by weary travelers. His mind is a perpetual engine of thought, constantly strategizing and planning. It functions with the intricate precision of a spider meticulously weaving an invisible web, connecting disparate details that elude the comprehension of others. Then, one particular morning, an anomaly occurs. As you procure olives from your favored vendor, your attention is drawn to a figure cloaked in dark attire, moving silently through the marketplace. This individual is neither browsing nor engaging in conversation. He merely observes. An inexplicable aura surrounds him, compelling people to instinctively yield passage without conscious thought. Shadows seem to cling to his form, and conversations subtly recede into silence as he passes. This enigmatic figure is Thanatos, the very personification of death, though his true identity remains concealed from the common populace. He has arrived in Corinth on a matter of urgent official decree. A soul is destined to depart this world today, and Thanatos has come to fulfill his ancient duty. The unforeseen complication, however, is that the individual slated for collection is none other than King Sisyphus himself. Yet Sisyphus, with his unparalleled sagacity, has long anticipated this very visitation. His remarkable intellect, as previously noted, allows him to discern patterns and predict events that remain invisible to ordinary perception. He has observed subtle temporal rhythms, the intricate unfolding of specific occurrences, and has harbored a growing suspicion that his appointed time might be drawing near. Thus, when Thanatos materializes at the royal palace that evening, Sisyphus extends a welcome befitting an old and cherished acquaintance. "Welcome, welcome," he intones, gesturing towards the finest vintage wine and the most sumptuous chair. "You must be weary from your arduous journey. Pray, be seated and find repose." It is uncommon for Thanatos to receive such an invitation to partake in conversation and hospitality. Most mortals either flee in terror or stoically resign themselves to their inevitable fate. This unexpectedly cordial reception piques Thanatos' curiosity, despite his formidable nature, leaving him to ponder the direction this unusual encounter might take. "I presume you are aware of my purpose here," Thanatos states, settling into the proffered chair. He concedes internally that the wine is indeed exceptional. "Oh, absolutely," Sisyphus responds with an air of profound understanding. "And I must confess I am deeply impressed by your meticulous work. The sheer precision, the impeccable timing, the masterful way you maintain such delicate balance. It must be an incredibly intricate task, coordinating all those profound transitions." To his own surprise, Thanatos finds himself nodding in agreement. His work is indeed immensely complex, and rarely does anyone acknowledge the profound skill and dedication it demands. He savors another sip of the exquisite wine, allowing the conversation to continue. "But do enlighten me," Sisyphus presses on, his voice imbued with genuine intellectual curiosity. "How precisely does it function? The intricate mechanism itself. I confess, I have always been captivated by ingenious contrivances. Consider these chains, for instance." He gestures towards a magnificent set of elaborate silver chains adorning the wall. They are purportedly unbreakable, according to the master smith who forged them. Yet I have often pondered, how might one truly verify such an extraordinary claim? And it is at this precise juncture that Sisyphus's legendary cunning truly manifests. For through an exquisite blend of feigned intellectual curiosity, subtle flattery, and the persuasive influence of excellent wine, he ingeniously persuades Thanatos to don the chains, merely to demonstrate their purported invincibility. For professional interest, of course. The instant those chains audibly click shut around Thanatos' wrists, the very fabric of reality shifts irrevocably. Death itself is now ensnared within Sisyphus's opulent palace, seated in a comfortable chair, exhibiting an expression of profound, albeit restrained, embarrassment. "This is rather awkward," Thanatos concedes with an air of understatement. "Perhaps for you," Sisyphus retorts, a triumphant smile playing upon his lips. "For me, it is remarkably convenient." And thus commences the most peculiar period in the annals of both Corinth and the entire world. With Death himself bound within the royal palace, no mortal soul can perish. not within the prosperous confines of Corinth, nor anywhere across the vast expanse of the globe. The elderly persist in their advanced years, defying the peaceful slumber of mortality. Warriors on distant battlefields sustain grievous, fatal wounds, yet inexplicably continue their relentless struggle. Humanity slowly begins to perceive that something fundamental has been profoundly disrupted within the natural order of existence. For Sisyphus, this turn of events is nothing short of perfection. He has achieved the clandestine aspiration of every mortal being. He has unequivocally vanquished death. He dedicates his days to the governance of Corinth, indulging in protracted, lavish dinners with his beloved wife Merope, and witnessing the breathtaking spectacle of the sunset from his palace's grand balcony. He has triumphed in the ultimate game, yet the taste of victory is not always as profoundly satisfying as one might initially envision. After a few weeks have elapsed, Sisyphus observes that Thanatos, despite his predicament, does not appear particularly distressed by his confinement. In fact, he seems to harbor a subtle, almost knowing amusement. "Are you enjoying your triumph?" Thanatos inquires one evening, his voice laced with an enigmatic tone. "Most thoroughly," Sisyphus replies, though a faint disquiet is stirred by the undertone in Thanatos's voice. "Excellent, excellent. I sincerely hope you savor every moment, because you must realize that eventually, my esteemed colleagues are bound to notice my prolonged absence and lack of reports, and when they do..." Thanatos allows his voice to trail off, accompanied by a subtle, knowing smile. It is then that a chilling realization dawns upon Sisyphus. He may have secured a momentary victory in this battle, but the war, it seems, is far from over. The gods, it becomes painstakingly clear, do not look kindly upon the disruption of their fundamental cosmic systems, even by the most ingenious of mortal kings. Still, for this fleeting moment, Sisyphus has achieved the impossible. He sits within his opulent palace, vibrantly alive, having outmaneuvered death itself. The evening light streams through the grand windows, bathing everything in a soft, golden hue. Somewhere in the distance, ships return to the harbor, their sails gracefully catching the day's final breeze. And in his comfortable, albeit confining chair, Thanatos waits with an almost unsettling patience, understanding implicitly that all victories are ephemeral, and that the true saga of Sisyphus has only just commenced. What profound repercussions will unfold when the other Olympian deities become aware of death's inexplicable disappearance? What choices would one make if granted the extraordinary power to circumvent mortality? Would such a victory truly taste as sweet as one imagines? Or would one begin to harbor the same unsettling questions that might now be stirring within Sisyphus, whether some games are simply too perilous to win? Fast forward 3 weeks since Thanatos found himself bound within the opulent confines of Corinth's royal palace. The initial euphoria surrounding this impossible feat has now settled into something far more peculiar, a world where the most fundamental and inevitable aspect of existence has simply ceased to occur. Each morning, you awaken into this new, altered reality, where death has embarked upon an unexpected and unprecedented sabbatical. Initially, this profound shift goes largely unnoticed. After all, death is not an everyday occurrence for every individual. Yet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, people begin to grasp that a fundamental alteration has reshaped their existence. The venerable old man who operates the pottery shop, who has suffered from a persistent, debilitating cough for months, continues to cough, but his condition never deteriorates. The woman who plummeted from her rooftop last week, an incident that should have undeniably claimed her life, now walks about with a collection of broken bones that ought to have been fatal, merely grumbling about the inconvenience. One might initially perceive this new reality as a utopian marvel. No more gnawing grief, no more agonizing loss, no more painful farewells to cherished loved ones. However, as the days inexorably progress, an unsettling truth begins to emerge. Immortality, it seems, is not quite the unmitigated blessing it first appears to be. Let us explore a typical day in this death-free world. You awaken in your modest dwelling near the bustling Corinthian marketplace. Beyond your window, the familiar symphony of morning sounds greets you. Merchants diligently setting up their stalls, the joyous clamor of children at play in the streets, and the distant, rhythmic murmur of waves breaking against the harbor. Everything appears ostensibly normal. Yet, as you proceed to purchase your daily bread from the baker, a peculiar observation strikes you. The baker's grandfather, who has been confined to a sickbed for many months, is now upright and actively assisting in the shop. He moves with a palpable slowness, his breathing labored, and his eyes betray a profound weariness that extends far beyond the need for sleep. Nevertheless, he labors on, because apparently he simply cannot die. A curious visitor once inquired of the local baker, "Pray tell, how fares your venerable grandfather?" The baker, casting a sorrowful gaze toward the frail, elderly man, merely offered a resigned shrug. "He ought to have found his peaceful slumber many weeks past," the baker lamented. "Yet he remains snared in this wretched existence. We are utterly at a loss as to what course of action to pursue. He endures incessant torment, but the sweet release of repose eludes him." This harrowing predicament laid bare the grim reality, the shadow cast by Sisyphus's audacious triumph. In the absence of death, suffering held no terminus. It merely perpetuated itself without end. The inherent, harmonious cadence of existence, which naturally ushers the aged to their rest, and thereby creates space for the burgeoning youth, had been irrevocably fractured. Concurrently, within the opulent confines of the royal palace, King Sisyphus partook in his morning vintage alongside Thanatos, who, despite his confinement in chains, exhibited an unexpectedly articulate and amiable disposition. Over the preceding weeks, an peculiar custom had blossomed between the two unlikely companions. Sisyphus diligently provided Thanatos with sustenance and drink, and in return, their conversations meandered through intricate philosophical debates, the machinations of political power, and the profound, intrinsic mechanics of mortal dissolution. "Tell me, my esteemed guest," Sisyphus began, pouring a generous measure of wine into both goblets, "does not the ceaseless task weary you? This perpetual collection of souls, day after day, through countless centuries." Thanatos mused upon the query, his gaze drifting to the meticulously crafted restraints that bound him. They were, he conceded inwardly, undeniably elegant in their artistry. You might find it rather astonishing. Each individual confronts their demise in a singularly unique manner. Some valiantly resist, others embrace their fate with equanimity, while a few endeavor to strike a bargain. It truly constitutes a remarkably diverse occupation. "And what of your current engagement?" Sisyphus pressed. a subtle glint of amusement in his eyes. "Presently," Thanatos responded with a serene composure, "I am engaged in the convivial act of sharing wine with an exceedingly astute monarch, while simultaneously observing the gradual awakening of the world to the profound realization that perhaps death, after all, is not such an unmitigated calamity. Indeed, disquieting tidings had begun to filter into Corinth from the far-flung corners of the Hellenic world. Messengers arrived bearing reports that instilled a pervasive sense of unease throughout the populace. In the bustling polis of Athens, a venerable matriarch had been trapped beneath the debris of a collapsed edifice for a full week, perpetually unable to succumb to her grievous injuries. In the martial city-state of Sparta, intrepid warriors engaged in brutal skirmishes where every participant sustained wounds that should have proven fatal, yet none yielded to their demise. The blood-soaked battlefields teemed with men who, by all natural laws, should have been lifeless corpses, yet they continued their ferocious combat, bearing sword slashes that would ordinarily be instantly lethal. The fundamental, established order of the cosmos was rapidly disintegrating, giving rise to unforeseen and intractable dilemmas. However, the true genesis of widespread consternation commenced when these alarming dispatches reached the hallowed heights of Mount Olympus. The Olympian deities, it must be understood, had been engrossed in their own celestial pursuits, and had not immediately discerned that their intricately structured cosmic apparatus had ground to a complete standstill. But in due course, Hades, the formidable sovereign of the underworld, apprehended that an uncommonly protracted period had elapsed without the arrival of any new souls. Initially, he surmised it was merely an unusual lull, perhaps an extended era of peace and robust health in the mortal domain. Yet, as days stretched into weeks with an unbroken absence of arrivals, he initiated a rigorous inquiry. And upon his startling discovery of Thanatos' inexplicable disappearance, it was then, most assuredly, that affairs took a decidedly intriguing turn. Back in the thriving city of Corinth, an ordinary citizen was engaged in their customary daily routine when a chilling phenomenon seized their attention, causing a profound dread to course through their veins. The sky, which moments before had been brilliantly clear and azure, abruptly deepened into an ominous gloom, not from the gathering of clouds, but from an intangible, oppressive presence. The very atmosphere seemed to congeal, heavy with the unmistakable emanation of divine fury. Sisyphus, still ensconced within his regal palace, sensed this profound shift as well. He sat opposite Thanatos, indulging in what had become their habitual afternoon vintage, when the ambient temperature within the chamber experienced a precipitous and palpable decline. "I surmise," Thanatos articulated with a remarkable equanimity, "that particular manifestation would be Ares." Sisyphus endeavored to maintain an unwavering tone in his voice. "The formidable god of war himself. He is, by all accounts, exceedingly vexed by the recent complications that have plagued the battlefields. It appears Hades dispatched him to investigate the matter. And indeed, the grand palace doors violently sprang open without the touch of any mortal hand. Into the chamber strode Ares, the indomitable deity of conflict, and his countenance betrayed an incandescent rage. He was a figure of imposing stature, broad-shouldered, clad in armor that seemed to absorb all ambient light rather than reflect it, rendering him a silhouette of menace. His eyes blazed with the concentrated fury of 1,000 accumulated battles. "What?" he thundered. his voice resonating with divine authority. "Have you dared to accomplish, Sisyphus?" Sisyphus, to his commendable credit, did not immediately succumb to panic. He rose deliberately, executed a deferential bow, and motioned toward an unoccupied chair. "Lord Ares, I extend a most cordial welcome to my humble palace. Might I offer you some refreshing wine?" Ares, his gaze swept from the still-chained Thanatos, then to Sisyphus, and back to Thanatos, his expression a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "Are you truly proposing to offer me refreshment whilst you hold the very embodiment of death captive?" "Well," Sisyphus responded with an air of disarming reasonableness, "it merely seemed the most courteous course of action under the circumstances." For a fleeting instant, Ares was so utterly dumbfounded by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this rejoinder that he found himself bereft of speech. Here stood a mere mortal king, who had, by some unfathomable means, ensnared death itself, plunged the entire cosmic order into unprecedented disarray, and now proffered libations as if the encounter were nothing more than a casual social call. However, Ares swiftly regained his formidable composure. With a seemingly nonchalant gesture that nonetheless contained the overwhelming force of divine power, he utterly annihilated the chains that bound Thanatos. The gleaming silver links scattered across the polished floor, shimmering like droplets of mercury. "My gratitude," Thanatos uttered, leisurely stretching his liberated arms. Those particular restraints had become rather irksome. Sisyphus watched his hard-won triumph dissipate before his very eyes. Yet, even in this moment of apparent defeat, even when confronted by the overwhelming wrath of the gods, his astute mind remained perpetually active, for Sisyphus, it must be understood, was never truly finished with his intricate machinations. "Before you escort me to the netherworld," he addressed Thanatos, his voice remarkably steady, "might I be permitted to request one minor indulgence?" Both deities regarded him with undisguised astonishment. Most mortals, when facing their imminent demise after perpetrating such an audacious deception, invariably resorted to fervent pleas for clemency or desperate attempts at flight. They certainly did not solicit favors. "What manner of favor do you propose?" Thanatos inquired, his curiosity piqued despite himself. And it was precisely at this juncture that Sisyphus artfully sprung his subsequent snare. For even though he had unequivocally lost this particular skirmish, his strategic intellect was already operating 3 steps ahead. The intricate game, in his shrewd estimation, was far from concluded. As the twilight descended upon Corinth, and the inherent natural order commenced its subtle reassertion, across the terrestrial sphere, individuals throughout the world perceived a profound yet subtle transformation. The venerable grandfather of the local potter at last closed his weary eyes and discovered the tranquility he had so long been denied. The grievously wounded warriors on distant battlefields finally received the restorative repose that had been cruelly withheld from them. The unfortunate woman entrapped beneath the collapsed edifice in Athens was, at last, liberated from her protracted agony. Death had rejoined the fabric of the world, as indispensable and fundamental as the very act of breathing, and yet one could not shake the pervasive intuition that Sisyphus's intricate saga with death remained far from its ultimate resolution. After all, a mortal cunning enough to ensnare death incarnate undoubtedly possessed more than a singular stratagem concealed within his sleeves. How, one might ponder, would the formidable Olympian deities react when the full realization dawned upon them that Sisyphus, even in his ostensible vanquishment, might still be orchestrating a game whose deeper complexities they had yet to fully grasp. Occasionally, the most perilous adversaries are those who retain an unnerving composure even when their fortunes appear to be irrevocably waning. That particular favor Sisyphus had so boldly solicited, just as Thanatos was preparing to usher him away, was poised to fundamentally redefine every preconceived notion held about the clever king of Corinth. One might imagine the scene in the palace courtyard the following morning. The air was invigoratingly crisp, permeated with the fragrant essence of olive groves and the distant, briny tang of the sea. One might reasonably anticipate discovering the royal residence shrouded in mourning, draped in funereal black fabrics, with attendants openly weeping for their supposedly departed monarch. Instead, what presented itself was something far more perplexing. The palace exuded an aura of complete normalcy. There were no somber garments, no preparations for a funeral cortege, no grief-stricken queen. In point of fact, Queen Merope was meticulously attending to her daily responsibilities, as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. She engaged in discussions regarding meal plans with the royal chef, meticulously reviewed trade agreements with visiting merchants, and generally comported herself as a woman whose husband was, unequivocally, very much alive. But here resided the profound enigma. Sisyphus was demonstrably not alive. Thanatos had, without question, taken him. The narrative's observer had witnessed it firsthand. Or, at the very least, had observed the formidable god of death leading the cunning king away into that shadowy, ethereal dominion where all mortals ultimately journey. So why did his royal consort behave as though he had merely stepped out for a casual promenade? To unravel this perplexing situation, it becomes imperative to revisit that singular favor Sisyphus had so cunningly requested. When confronted with their inevitable demise, most mortals implore for additional time, or mercy, or a final opportunity to bid farewell. Sisyphus, however, had sought something far more precise, and as subsequent events would reveal, infinitely more ingenious. "Before I accompany you," he had addressed Thanatos with an air of solemn duty, "I find it necessary to ensure that my earthly affairs are meticulously in order. You comprehend, I trust. I am, after all, a king. There are weighty responsibilities that cannot be neglected." Thanatos, who had recently endured several weeks of ignominious confinement, thanks to Sisyphus's earlier deceptions, was, understandably, imbued with a pronounced wariness. "What precisely do you signify by affairs?" he questioned, his tone cautious. "Nothing of any dramatic import," Sisyphus blandly reassured him. "Merely a brief conversation with my esteemed wife, explicit instructions concerning my funeral rites, and the proper execution of the requisite ceremonies. You are, I am certain, fully cognizant of the profound significance of these sacred traditions." And indeed, funeral rites held an immensely pivotal role in the spiritual and cultural landscape of ancient Greece. Without the scrupulous performance of the appropriate ceremonies, a mortal soul was destined to be denied passage, and thus unable to attain peace within the solemn confines of the underworld. Even the mighty Olympian deities themselves accorded profound respect to this deeply ingrained tradition. Consequently, Thanatos reluctantly acceded to Sisyphus's request, permitting him to confer with his wife prior to his final departure. What transpired next was the clandestine conversation between King Sisyphus and Queen Merope. Yet it was decidedly not the kind of discourse one might anticipate between a husband and wife confronting an imminent, eternal separation. Listen with the utmost attention, Sisyphus instructed her, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper so that Thanatos, standing nearby, would remain oblivious to their exchange. When I succumb to death, and that moment will arrive very shortly, you absolutely must not perform the customary funeral rites. Merope's countenance registered profound confusion. What precisely do you mean by such an instruction? No funeral rites at all. No offerings to the gods. No coins placed upon my eyes for the ferryman Charon. Absolutely nothing. Allow everyone to believe that you have simply become forgetful regarding these crucial matters, Sisyphus commanded. But without the proper rites, Merope countered, her voice laced with genuine alarm. Your soul will be forever trapped, unable to find its way. Precisely, uttered Sisyphus, his lips curling into that familiar knowing smile, a clear signal that his intellect was perpetually several steps ahead of those around him. Place your absolute trust in my judgment on this matter. Thus, when the somber figure of Thanatos ultimately escorted Sisyphus away to the shadowy realm of the underworld, his devoted wife, Merope, meticulously followed her husband's precise directives. She maintained her customary daily routine with an unwavering composure. There were no solemn funeral preparations, no mournful rituals. She conducted herself as though her spouse had merely embarked upon a routine business excursion and would assuredly make his return once his pressing professional obligations were fulfilled. Now, let us turn our attention to the fascinating sequence of events that unfolded for Sisyphus within the dominion of the departed. The underworld, it is crucial to understand, is not the fiery, torment-laden abyss depicted in certain sensationalized mythologies. Instead, it more closely resembles an expansive, monochromatic, bureaucratic labyrinth, an interminable sequence of chambers and passages where newly arrived souls undergo meticulous processing, rigorous judgment, and subsequent assignment to their destined eternal accommodations. Upon his arrival, Sisyphus, much like every recently deceased spirit, was promptly directed toward the desolate banks of the river Styx. Here, tradition dictated that he was to present Charon, the ancient ferryman, with 2 obols as payment for safe passage across the murky waters. These vital coins should have been reverently placed upon his eyes during his funeral rites. However, due to his ingenious prior arrangements, there were naturally no funeral rites whatsoever. Consequently, Sisyphus found himself entirely devoid of the requisite currency. My profound apologies, he smoothly informed Charon, a picture of feigned regret. But it appears there has been an unfortunate oversight. My wife was entrusted with the responsibility of providing the fare, yet it seems she has regrettably forgotten this crucial detail. Charon, a venerable figure who had diligently transported countless souls across the Styx for millennia, had witnessed every conceivable human predicament. Yet the extraordinary case of a deceased individual whose family had simply neglected to perform the proper funerary ceremonies was sufficiently rare and anomalous to present a genuine administrative conundrum. Without the stipulated fare, I am regrettably unable to transport you across the river, Charon explained with an air of immutable authority. Such are the established regulations. Of course, absolutely, Sisyphus affirmed, nodding sagely. I comprehend entirely. Rules are indeed rules. Nevertheless, surely there exists an individual with whom I might discuss this predicament, some established avenue for an administrative review process. And so, Sisyphus soon discovered himself ensnared in the underworld's equivalent of a customer service complaint department. He was unceremoniously shuffled from one minor functionary to another, each official grappling with the perplexing challenge of how to manage a soul who, by all technicalities, could not advance to judgment, because the essential formalities had been conspicuously omitted. Eventually, this unprecedented matter ascended to the attention of Hades himself. The formidable god of the underworld was seated upon his imposing throne, diligently reviewing the day's voluminous paperwork, when a visibly nervous aide cautiously approached him. "My esteemed lord," the aide stammered, "we are confronted with an exceedingly unusual situation. There is a soul awaiting processing who cannot proceed because his funeral rites were, astonishingly, never performed." Hades slowly lifted his gaze from his documents, his expression one of mild curiosity. "Never performed. That is indeed peculiar. What explanation does this particular soul offer for such an oversight?" "He asserts that his wife simply forgot, my lord. He appears quite distressed by this unfortunate turn of events." Now, Hades was not easily deceived. He had presided over the underworld for countless eons, and he possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every stratagem and deception mortals might attempt. However, this specific situation was genuinely without precedent. A wife neglecting to perform funeral rites for her own husband. The notion was so profoundly improbable that it might, against all odds, actually be true. When Sisyphus was ultimately ushered before the majestic throne, he presented his carefully crafted case with an air of impeccable sincerity. He eloquently expressed his profound shock and palpable dismay that his beloved wife could have displayed such a glaring lapse in judgment. He voiced deep concerns about the implications this oversight might have for the sanctity of their marriage. He even fretted aloud about the potential scandal this egregious neglect would undoubtedly ignite back in the bustling city of Corinth. "This entire affair is deeply unsettling," he confided to Hades, his voice tinged with well-rehearsed anguish. "My poor Merope must be utterly consumed by grief. That is, in all likelihood, the sole reason she overlooked the vital rites. She is clearly not thinking with her usual clarity." Hades meticulously observed this extraordinary mortal. There was an elusive quality about Sisyphus that seemed vaguely familiar, though the god could not quite pinpoint its origin. "And what course of action would you propose we undertake to rectify this perplexing predicament?" "Well," Sisyphus mused thoughtfully, feigning a moment of deep contemplation, "I presume someone ought to return to Corinth and gently remind my wife of her sacred duties. Ensure that the appropriate ceremonies are properly conducted. But who, I wonder, possesses the unique capacity to undertake such a vital task?" "Are you intimating?" "Oh, I could never presume to suggest anything to a deity," Sisyphus interjected swiftly, his tone deferential. "However, if someone were to temporarily restore me to life, just long enough to rectify this administrative anomaly, I would be eternally grateful for such divine benevolence." And it was precisely at this juncture that Hades committed the very error Sisyphus had so cunningly anticipated. Confronted with an unprecedented bureaucratic quagmire and presented with what appeared to be a perfectly rational and straightforward solution, the formidable god of the underworld granted Sisyphus a temporary reprieve, a limited leave to return to the realm of the living and meticulously arrange his own funeral proceedings. 3 days, Hades declared, his voice resonating with authority. You are granted precisely 3 days to ensure the proper rites are performed. Thereafter, you are to return to this realm immediately. Of course, my esteemed lord, 3 days will prove more than ample for this essential task. And so, Sisyphus found himself miraculously back in the vibrant world of the living, ostensibly for a mere 72 hours, and supposedly solely for the purpose of orchestrating his own funeral. One can, of course, readily surmise the degree of seriousness with which he intended to adhere to these imposed limitations. When he gracefully strode through the grand palace doors that very evening, Queen Merope greeted him with a smile that, despite its warmth, could not entirely conceal her underlying apprehension. "How did everything transpire?" she inquired, her voice hushed. "Flawlessly," Sisyphus responded with a triumphant glint in his eyes, "though I strongly suspect we may have some rather elaborate explanations to offer in a few days' time." As the sun began its majestic descent over Corinth, painting the vast sky in resplendent hues of burnished gold and deep crimson, Sisyphus stood proudly on his palace balcony, undeniably alive in a world where he should, by all rights, have been profoundly deceased. The gentle Mediterranean breeze carried the familiar, comforting sounds of his beloved city, the distant cries of merchants concluding their daily transactions, the playful shouts of children being summoned home for their evening meal, and the rhythmic murmur of waves caressing the harbor walls. He had, once again, achieved the seemingly impossible. He had not merely defied death. He had, with unparalleled guile, persuaded death itself to politely escort him back to the vibrant embrace of life. Yet, as he observed the nascent stars beginning to emerge in the rapidly darkening firmament, Sisyphus might have entertained a fleeting thought that perhaps he had become a trifle too clever for his own ultimate good. After all, the powerful gods possessed an extraordinarily long and unforgiving memory, and they held little appreciation for being made to appear foolish or susceptible to mortal trickery. What, one might ponder, would genuinely transpire when those stipulated 3 days inevitably elapsed? What course of action would an individual pursue if they unexpectedly found themselves granted a temporary reprieve from the cold grasp of death itself? Would one conscientiously honor the solemn agreement? Or would the irresistible temptation to ascertain just how far one could audacious push their luck prove too compelling to resist? Those 3 precious days that Hades had magnanimously granted Sisyphus, well, they unfolded precisely as one might anticipate from the legendary king who had once audaciously chained up death itself. Picture, if you will, a stroll through the bustling streets of Corinth, a full 6 months after Sisyphus was, by divine decree, supposed to have made his dutiful return to the underworld. The morning market is a vibrant hive of its customary activity. Energetic merchants are vociferously hawking their diverse wares, their voices echoing through the throng, and joyous children are merrily playing in the sun-dappled streets. And there, in plain sight, meticulously examining some particularly exquisite pottery at one of the bustling stalls, stands none other than King Sisyphus himself, undeniably alive, and evidently thoroughly engrossed in his decidedly extended vacation from the grim clutches of death. You see, When those initial 3 days had unceremoniously expired, Sisyphus made an astonishing and rather convenient discovery. He realized, with a profound sense of self-satisfaction, that absolutely no one was actively coming to collect him. Apparently, the intricate bureaucracy of the underworld operated on something akin to an honor system when it pertained to temporary resurrections. They had, quite simply, expected him to honor his solemn promise and return precisely when he had agreed. This, as one can readily surmise, constituted a monumental miscalculation on their part. Sisyphus, during those intervening months, dedicated himself wholeheartedly to the very activities he cherished most, diligently ruling his prosperous city, luxuriating in the myriad pleasures of life, and indulging in an immense sense of personal gratification for having so brilliantly outsmarted the formidable gods. Not merely once nor twice, but now an astonishing 3 times. He had audacious chained death itself. He had cunningly convinced Hades to grant him a return to the world of the living, and he had then, with remarkable impunity, simply chosen to remain. However, divine patience, while undeniably vast and enduring, is by no means infinite. And eventually, the watchful gods became acutely aware that their temporary resurrection had, quite unequivocally, transitioned into a decidedly permanent state of affairs. The second time they dispatched envoys to retrieve Sisyphus, they did not bother with the formidable figure of Thanatos. They eschewed the niceties of due process or cumbersome bureaucratic procedures. This time, they dispatched the swift and cunning Hermes, the revered messenger god, armed with exceedingly precise and unequivocal instructions. Retrieve Sisyphus immediately by any and all necessary means, and deliver him without delay to the underworld, where he rightfully belongs. Hermes materialized silently within the opulent palace throne room on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, precisely as Sisyphus was engrossed in the meticulous review of various trade agreements. There was no dramatic entrance to announce his arrival, no booming thunderclaps, no dazzling supernatural effects. One moment, the expansive room was empty save for the solitary king, and the very next instant, a young man clad in unassuming traveler's attire stood calmly beside the ornate throne. Sisyphus, Hermes stated pleasantly, his voice devoid of any particular urgency. You are conspicuously late. Sisyphus slowly looked up from his scrolls, a flicker of mild annoyance crossing his features. Late for what, pray tell? Your scheduled appointment with eternity. You were, by all accounts, supposed to have returned to the underworld a full 6 months ago. Ah, all that, Sisyphus replied, feigning a sudden recollection. Yes, I have indeed been meaning to attend to that rather pressing matter. I have simply been terribly preoccupied with my extensive royal duties, you understand. Perhaps next week would be more suitable. Hermes offered a polite smile, but it was conspicuously lacking in warmth or genuine amusement. I am afraid that next week will not be acceptable to anyone involved in this particular arrangement. We are departing forthwith. And this time, there was absolutely no room for any form of negotiation or protracted discussion. Hermes simply extended a hand and lightly touched Sisyphus on the shoulder, and in an instant, the king found himself abruptly standing in the somber throne room of Hades, facing a god who was demonstrably less patient and considerably more stern than he had been during their initial encounter. Sisyphus, Hades intoned, his voice resonating with the immeasurable weight of countless ages. We need to engage in a rather serious conversation. The throne room of the underworld is unequivocally not a place conceived for comfort or ease. The towering walls are constructed from a dense, obsidian-like black stone that appears to actively absorb light rather than reflect it, casting an eternal gloom. The air within is perpetually cool and profoundly still, carrying no discernible scent or echo of the vibrant living world above. When Hades speaks, his profound words seem to linger in the heavy, silent air for an unnervingly protracted duration. You dared to shackle my esteemed peer, Thanatos, Hades continued, his voice laced with frigid indignation, thereby casting the very fabric of the cosmic order into disarray for an extended duration. You cunningly beguiled me into bestowing upon you a fleeting return to the mortal realm, only to then brazenly disregard your sacred commitment to revert to the underworld. Such audacious ingenuity, bordering on sacrilege, can no longer be tolerated. Sisyphus, despite confronting the unmitigated wrath of the formidable deity of the deceased, exhibited an unwavering equanimity. I comprehend your profound vexation, my sovereign. Might there be an opportunity, perhaps, to forge some mutually agreeable accord? No, Hades declared unequivocally. The era of pacts, parleys, and perfidious ploys has drawn to a definitive close. Was it truly your fervent desire to elude the clutches of mortality? Very well, your wish shall be granted, though its manifestation may prove to be a most exquisite torment. And it was precisely at this juncture that Sisyphus learned the bitter lesson. The precise fulfillment of one's deepest desires can, on occasion, culminate in the most dreadful of predicaments. With a mere wave of his hand, Hades enacted his decree, and suddenly Sisyphus found himself in a desolate expanse entirely dissimilar to any domain within the shadowy realm he had previously traversed. It was a craggy, desolate incline, ascending interminably toward an overcast, somber firmament. At his feet reposed a colossal stone, possessed of significant mass, yet not beyond the bounds of human exertion. The sphere was perfectly round, its surface rendered impeccably smooth by the relentless attrition of innumerable ages of atmospheric erosion. Behold, this stark landscape shall serve as your perpetual dwelling, Hades proclaimed with an air of absolute finality, and this, your new, unending occupation. Your sole imperative shall be to propel this colossal stone to the pinnacle of this formidable peak. Upon attaining the apex, a brief respite shall be your sole reward. Sisyphus surveyed the imposing rock, then cast his gaze toward the towering ascent, before returning his attention to the formidable deity. Indeed, that particular decree does not strike me as excessively arduous, in truth. Perhaps a measure of physical exertion will prove rather salubrious for my constitution. Oh, there is one more detail, Hades uttered, a chilling grin, utterly devoid of any genuine benevolence, spreading across his visage. This particular stone, however, possesses a peculiar enchantment. Just as you approach the precipice of triumph, it shall inexorably plummet back to the base of the mountain, compelling you to recommence your Sisyphean toil anew. In all the annals of his exceedingly protracted and cunning existence, Sisyphus found himself utterly bereft of utterance, his habitual wit momentarily vanquished. Forever, Hades appended, ensuring the absolute clarity of his pronouncement. Your fervent desire was to circumvent mortality. Congratulations, Sisyphus. You shall indeed be spared the final cessation of life. Instead, you are condemned to perpetually propel this immense stone up this formidable peak for all time, without end. Dome. With that definitive declaration, Hades dissolved into the ethereal air, abandoning Sisyphus to his solitary fate on the desolate mountainside, accompanied only by his colossal burden and a dawning, dreadful comprehension of the profound and inescapable essence of genuine retribution. The first day, Sisyphus approached the task with his characteristic self-assurance. Surely this undertaking could not present an insurmountable challenge. He was a man renowned for his astute intellect, boundless resourcefulness, and a long history of surmounting seemingly intractable dilemmas. He braced his shoulder against the unyielding mass and commenced his arduous propulsion. The boulder, while possessed of significant mass, was not beyond the bounds of human exertion. The mountain presented a formidable incline, but his physical prowess was considerable. With each deliberate stride, each measured advance, and throughout the relentless passage of time, he steadily ascended the arduous gradient. The colossal stone traversed the rugged terrain with a surprising degree of fluidity. His sinews tautened with exertion, rivulets of perspiration coursed down his countenance, yet his ascent toward the pinnacle remained unyielding. With the inexorable march of time, his consciousness drifted, contemplating the rich tapestry of his mortal existence, the bustling city of Corinth, the beloved visage of his consort Merope, and the intricate web of ingenious stratagems that had ultimately culminated in his present, peculiar predicament. The sheer physicality of the endeavor, surprisingly, offered a peculiar solace. It provided his perpetually restless intellect with a singularly uncomplicated focal point, a welcome respite from its usual machinations. As what he conjectured to be the twilight hours drew nigh, despite the peculiar temporal distortions inherent in this realm, Sisyphus perceived the looming silhouette of the summit, tantalizingly close. Only a handful of paces remained. A final surge of resolve was all that was required. His lower limbs throbbed with unremitting pain. His dorsal region protested with a dull, persistent ache. Yet the sweet taste of triumph was now almost palpable. Summoning a prodigious reserve of strength, he delivered a conclusive, Herculean shove, and the gargantuan stone lumbered over the very pinnacle of the formidable peak. For a fleeting instant, Sisyphus stood sentinel upon the mountain's crown, his breath ragged, yet his spirit soaring in a moment of profound victory. The deed was accomplished. Even amidst the very fabric of his perpetual damnation, he had ingeniously carved out a pathway to success. He remained, in his own estimation, demonstrably more cunning than the Olympian deities had ever deigned to acknowledge. It was at this precise juncture that the colossal boulder, with an ominous rumble, commenced its inexorable descent down the opposing face of the peak. Initially, a flicker of hope ignited within him, suggesting he might yet intercept its trajectory. He sprinted in frantic pursuit of the plummeting stone, his arms outstretched, desperately endeavoring to arrest its downward momentum. Alas, the immense rock accelerated with terrifying velocity, bounding and careening precipitously down the rugged incline, utterly defying his every attempt at intervention. Sisyphus stood witness as the entirety of his day's grueling labor evaporated into naught within mere moments. The colossal sphere continued its uncontrolled journey until it ultimately settled at the very base of the mountain, reposing precisely upon the identical patch of ground from which his morning Sisyphean endeavor had originated. In that crushing instant, the full, devastating truth dawned upon him. This was no mere retribution for his myriad deceptions and intricate machinations. Rather, it was a torment meticulously crafted, exquisitely tailored for an individual of his particular disposition. A man who derived profound satisfaction from unraveling complex enigmas, from discovering ingenious remedies, from emerging victorious in contests deemed insurmountable by lesser mortals. The true malevolence of this decree resided not in the sheer physical exertion it demanded, but in the insidious, flickering flame of hope it perpetually ignited, only to extinguish. Each successive day, he would commit to the arduous task of propelling the mammoth stone skyward. Each day, he would register tangible advancement, savoring the fleeting gratification of nearing his objective. Each day, he would attain the mountain's zenith and bask, however transiently, in the glow of perceived victory. And each day, with soul-crushing inevitability, he would be compelled to witness that hard-won triumph dissolve into utter futility as the relentless stone recommenced its precipitous plunge. As Sisyphus commenced his deliberate, somber descent back to the mountain's base, preparing to recommence his endless ordeal, he grasped the chilling truth. The Olympian deities had conceived the quintessential retribution for a mortal audacious enough to believe he could circumvent the very decrees of destiny. They had, with a perverse twist of fate, bestowed upon him precisely that which his cunning heart had always yearned for, an interminable test of will, a perpetual contest to engage his formidable intellect. The singular, agonizing flaw, however, lay in the inescapable reality that this was a game he was condemned, irrevocably and eternally, never to conquer. Yet a compelling nuance emerges concerning Sisyphus, a facet of his being that the divine architects of his torment may have inadvertently overlooked in their grand design. He was, fundamentally, an individual who derived profound self-worth from his unwavering tenacity, from his relentless resolve to persevere even when confronted with overwhelming adversity. Thus, as he once more braced his frame against the colossal stone for its subsequent ascent, a subtle yet unmistakable resolve flickered in his gaze, hinting that his spirit, though chastened, remained far from utterly vanquished. Indeed, eternity stretches forth as an immeasurable expanse of time, and a mortal possessed of such extraordinary cunning, capable even of ensnaring the very embodiment of death, might, in the fullness of endless ages, yet unearth some elusive contentment, some solitary triumph, even within the confines of the most meticulously conceived divine retribution. One might ponder the intricate workings of Sisyphus's mind as he embarks upon that arduous second ascent of the formidable peak. What internal anchor would an individual choose to grasp if confronted with an eternally insurmountable endeavor, destined for perpetual repetition? For it is often the case that the most profound triumphs reside not in outward accolades, but in the unseen, internal fortitude that defies external defeat. Concurrently, as Sisyphus endures his unending purgatorial existence, perpetually propelling his monumental stone up the desolate mountainside, the vibrant tapestry of life within the city of Corinth unfurls, uninterrupted by his absence. Nevertheless, the metropolis he so famously governed bears the indelible imprints of his singular reign, manifest in both overt and understated alterations to its societal fabric. Envision yourself traversing the bustling thoroughfares of Corinth on an ordinary morn, approximately a full year subsequent to Sisyphus's definitive vanishing from the mortal plane. The venerable city, far from stagnating, continues its vigorous operations. Indeed, one might even observe a newfound efficiency, a more seamless flow to its daily rhythms. Yet, an intangible essence pervades the very atmosphere, a distinctive characteristic that sets Corinth apart from its Hellenic counterparts. Your journey commences at the vibrant agora, the bustling marketplace that functions as the pulsating nucleus of urban life. The purveyors of goods within this esteemed forum possess a singular renown that echoes across the entirety of Hellas. Their fame stems from their extraordinary acumen in commercial parleys, their uncanny knack for devising ingenious resolutions to quandaries that utterly perplex their counterparts from rival city-states, and a seemingly preternatural faculty for transmogrifying inherent drawbacks into lucrative opportunities. Consider, for instance, the exemplary case of Marcus, a distinguished purveyor of ceramic wares. He is observed elucidating to a discerning patron hailing from Athens why his collection of vases, each bearing a delicate fissure, paradoxically surpasses unblemished pottery in intrinsic worth. Observe, if you will, Marcus articulates, tracing a slender digit along the delicate imperfection. This singular demarcation serves as a testament to the clay's perilous odyssey through the inferno. It stands as irrefutable evidence that the vessel has undergone rigorous trial and emerged robust. Conversely, a pot devoid of such honorable scars has yet to truly prove its mettle. The Athenian customer, initially sporting an expression of profound skepticism, finds himself, by the culmination of the exchange, not only tendering an exorbitant sum for the flawed ceramic, but also expressing profound gratitude to Marcus for his enlightening discourse. Such is the quintessential essence of Corinthian mercantile artistry, the unparalleled aptitude for recontextualizing perceived imperfections as desirable attributes, and for transforming vexing obstacles into propitious avenues for gain. This unparalleled dexterity was meticulously cultivated by the city's traders, honed through years of astute observation of their former sovereign. Sisyphus possessed an innate genius for compelling individuals to perceive circumstances from radically divergent perspectives, and this singular faculty had, over time, become an indelible component of the city's collective ethos. As one proceeds deeper into the bustling marketplace, a further undeniably Corinthian characteristic becomes conspicuously apparent, namely, the idiosyncratic methodology employed by its citizens when confronted with unforeseen difficulties. Should the baker's essential kiln unexpectedly cease its function, rather than merely summoning a craftsman for immediate rectification, he ingeniously fabricates an improvised apparatus, harnessing the reflective power of mirrors and the focused intensity of solar rays to maintain his production of freshly baked loaves. Similarly, upon the arrival of a vessel laden with freight exceeding the capacity of conventional hoisting machinery, the industrious dockhands collaboratively engineer an intricate pulley arrangement, ingeniously utilizing the ship's very masts as integral components. It is crucial to note that these improvised resolutions do not invariably surpass traditional methods in efficiency or simplicity. Indeed, they occasionally manifest as considerably more intricate. Nevertheless, they stand as vibrant testaments to an inventive spirit, forged within a civic culture that assiduously cultivated the art of circumvention and ingenious workarounds, rather than direct confrontation when confronted with impediments. Within the venerable confines of the royal palace, Queen Merope has assumed the mantle of daily governance over Corinth. She has demonstrated herself to be a remarkably capable sovereign in her own stead, albeit her administrative philosophy is markedly more unvarnished and direct than that which characterized her departed spouse. When engaging in the delicate art of commercial pacts, for example, she adheres rigorously to the precise stipulations articulated within the contractual documents. This newfound rectitude has necessitated a considerable recalibration for Corinth's established trading confederates, who had, over time, become thoroughly habituated to Sisyphus's notoriously elastic exegesis of formal accords. Indeed, numerous merchants hailing from neighboring polities have expressed genuine astonishment and satisfaction upon realizing that when Queen Merope pledges the provision of 100 amphoras of unction, she unfailingly furnishes precisely that quantity, rather than presenting a mere 97 vessels accompanied by an intricate, convoluted rationale, purporting that the deficit of 3 is, in fact, numerically equivalent to the promised 100, given the purported superlative excellence of the remaining consignment. The enduring influence of Sisyphus, however, has not entirely dissipated. The city's young inhabitants, for instance, are meticulously reared on captivating narratives concerning the exploits of their erstwhile monarch, Sisyphus. Yet, these are far from the conventional sagas of valor and might. Instead, their foundational stories revolve around the essence of ingenuity, the pursuit of unconventional solutions, and the critical importance of strategic foresight, anticipating outcomes several steps in advance. Should one venture into the academic institutions where the nascent Corinthians acquire their foundational literacy and numeracy, it would not be uncommon to encounter an instructor recounting the ingenious tale of how Sisyphus masterfully persuaded a rival sovereign to exchange his most prized steeds for a drove of humble mules. His compelling argument rested on the premise that mules, possessing a partial lineage from donkeys, were demonstrably more sagacious than horses, and consequently held a superior intrinsic value. The young scholars delight in these anecdotes, not because they champion deceit, but rather because they venerate acute intellect and boundless inventiveness. Through these narratives, they assimilate the profound lesson that often a multitude of approaches exists for resolving a predicament, and that the most patently obvious answer is rarely the most efficacious. This pervasive cultural veneration for astute thinking yields tangible advantages. Corinthian engineers, for example, are universally acclaimed across the Hellenic world for their groundbreaking construction methodologies. The city's bustling harbor, a monumental undertaking expanded under Sisyphus's own reign, ingeniously employs a sophisticated network of redirected oceanic currents. This innovative system perpetually maintains the waterway at a sufficient depth for substantial vessels, entirely obviating the need for incessant, costly dredging, a marvel of engineering that utterly perplexed experts from neighboring city-states until they undertook rigorous, painstaking analysis. The martial forces of Corinth likewise exhibit clear manifestations of Sisyphus's lasting imprint. Eschewing a sole reliance on brute physical prowess and raw courage, Corinthian legionaries undergo rigorous training to cultivate a profound tactical acumen. They are meticulously instructed in the art of leveraging topographical features to their strategic benefit, discerning the vulnerabilities within their adversaries, formations, and securing triumph through astute strategic planning, rather than mere overwhelming force. A visiting Spartan general, renowned for his martial prowess, once remarked with a begrudging yet unmistakable admiration that engaging in combat with Corinthians was akin to participating in a game of chess against an opponent who perpetually redefined the parameters. This was not a matter of outright deception, he clarified, but rather a mastery of interpreting established regulations in ways no other competitor had ever conceived. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating dimension of post-Sisyphus Corinthian society resides in its distinctive approach to established authority. Having experienced governance under a sovereign who habitually outmaneuvered even the divine powers, the Corinthians have cultivated a robust, discerning skepticism towards any individual professing to hold definitive answers to all inquiries. When an itinerant philosopher arrives within the city walls, grandly proclaiming ultimate enlightenment regarding the fundamental nature of existence, the Corinthians extend a courteous audience. Subsequently, however, they pose meticulously crafted, incisive questions that progressively illuminate the lacuna within the philosopher's purported comprehensive knowledge. Their motive is not malevolence. Rather, they harbor an authentic intellectual curiosity for novel concepts, but they have been profoundly educated to refrain from accepting any assertion without subjecting it to rigorous, meticulous scrutiny. This profound intellectual autonomy has transformed Corinth into a magnetic nexus, attracting visionary thinkers and pioneering innovators from every corner of the Mediterranean basin. Scholars are keenly aware that if their hypotheses can withstand the discerning scrutiny of a Corinthian audience, they possess the intellectual resilience to be presented successfully anywhere. Precisely because Corinthian audiences are renowned for posing the most penetrating and insightful questions. Even the sacred edifices of the city bear witness to Sisyphus's singular influence. While other Greek metropolises might erect temples primarily to impress the gods with their sheer monumental grandeur, Corinthian temples are ingeniously conceived to embody cleverness itself. The Temple of Apollo, for example, is architecturally oriented so that the nascent rays of the morning sun precisely illuminate the deity's statue, creating a breathtaking optical illusion of the god effulging with divine luminosity. The Temple of Aphrodite, conversely, employs acoustic principles with such consummate skill that a softly whispered supplication uttered at one extremity of the sacred space resonates with crystalline clarity at the altar, instilling in worshippers the profound and intimate sensation that the goddess herself is personally attending to their entreaties. These sophisticated designs are by no means attempts to delude the gods. The Greeks were far too devout for such sacrilege. Instead, they represent profound expressions of human creativity and pious devotion, innovative methods for enriching and imbuing the religious experience with greater significance and indelible memorability. As twilight descends upon Corinth, one might fortuitously discover oneself within the convivial confines of one of the city's many taverns, absorbing the vibrant tapestry of conversations unfolding nearby. The subjects of discourse are universally familiar to any Greek city: political machinations, commercial ventures, familial affairs, and local gossip. However, a distinctive characteristic permeates the manner in which Corinthians engage with these topics. When an individual articulates a challenging problem, the immediate customary response is not an outpouring of sympathy or prescriptive advice. Rather, it is a volley of probing inquiries. Have you considered reevaluating the situation from an entirely inverse perspective? What if the core issue is fundamentally different from your initial perception? What might be the ramifications if you were to undertake the precise antithesis of what is universally anticipated? This intellectual rigor is not indicative of an austere, detached intellectualism. Corinthians harbor profound affection and concern for their compatriots and neighbors. However, they have assimilated from their legendary former king the profound insight that the most effective way to assist another is frequently to empower them to reconceptualize their predicament. A nascent merchant, beset by anxieties concerning fierce competition from a rival trader, might depart a Corinthian tavern possessing a radically fresh comprehension of his commercial enterprise, not because he received direct counsel, but because the precisely formulated questions enabled him to perceive latent opportunities he had previously overlooked. As one ambles homeward through the hushed thoroughfares, past dwellings where families are preparing for the tranquil embrace of night, a contemplation might arise regarding the profound implications of residing within a city so fundamentally shaped by an individual like Sisyphus. It is not to suggest that every Corinthian citizen is an inveterate trickster or an elaborate schemer. The vast majority of the populace are honest, diligently industrious, and transparent in their dealings. Nevertheless, each individual has been indelibly touched by the profound conviction that intelligence and innovative thinking are virtues supremely worthy of assiduous cultivation. They have internalized the understanding that complex problems frequently possess a multiplicity of viable resolutions, that authoritative pronouncements should be subjected to respectful yet persistent interrogation, and that the innate human capacity for unconventional thought constitutes one of humanity's most extraordinary endowments. In a profound and unexpected sense, Sisyphus ultimately achieved a unique form of immortality, not through his audacious attempts to circumvent death, but rather through the indelible and pervasive influence he bequeathed to the populace he once governed. With every instance, a Corinthian merchant devises an ingenious stratagem for a commercial quandary. With every occasion, a Corinthian engineer conceptualizes an architecturally pioneering edifice, and with every moment, a Corinthian citizen articulates a deeply penetrating question that pierces to the very essence of an issue. An intrinsic fragment of Sisyphus endures. Perhaps this constitutes a more sublime form of eternal existence than he ever envisioned. It is not an unending personal lifespan, but rather the perpetuation of seminal ideas and cherished values that collectively render the world a more intellectually stimulating and vibrant realm. One might ponder the nature of the lasting legacy an individual would aspire to cultivate within their own community. What profound significance would it hold to realize that one's distinctive approach to problem-solving had become inextricably woven into the very fabric of how an entire urban collective navigated the myriad challenges of its daily existence? The saga of Sisyphus transcends the mere narrative of a single cunning monarch and his arduous boulder. It delves into a far more expansive and intricate domain, the precarious equilibrium of power dynamics between mortal beings and the divine pantheon, and the profound repercussions that ensue when an individual defiantly rejects their predetermined station within that cosmic order. One might envision the august assembly within the grand council chamber of Mount Olympus, several days subsequent to Sisyphus's consignment to his perpetual Sisyphean torment. The Olympian deities are convened for one of their customary deliberations, addressing the intricate affairs of humanity and the overarching administration of the cosmos. Yet, on this particular occasion, the discourse inexorably gravitates back to the unsettling precedent set by the Corinthian king. Zeus, the sovereign of the gods, occupies his majestic throne, his countenance etched with a contemplative gravitas. Surrounding him, his fellow celestial beings engage in an earnest and protracted debate concerning the far-reaching implications of the extraordinary events they have recently witnessed. For Sisyphus, it is clear, had instigated profound questions that extended far beyond the simple calculus of transgression and retribution. The crux of the matter, articulated Athena, the sagacious goddess of wisdom, is not merely that he dared to shackle Thanatos or that he cunningly outmaneuvered Hades. The profound issue lies in his very success. For several months, he demonstrably managed to unravel the fundamental tapestry of existential order. Apollo, the radiant god of melodic harmony and prescient foresight, concurred with a solemn nod. Mortals in distant cities are already disseminating narratives concerning Sisyphus. A disconcerting number of these accounts possess an almost reverential, admiring undertone. Shabom. This indeed represented the true existential quandary confronting the divine council. It was not simply a matter of meting out appropriate punishment to a single transgressor for his offenses. It was fundamentally about safeguarding the intricate, overarching framework that ensured the seamless functioning of the entire universe. If mortal beings began to harbor the conviction that they could effectively defy divine authority, what catastrophic unraveling would then befall the meticulously balanced cosmic order? Hades, still nursing a subtle residue of embarrassment from having been so artfully outwitted by a mere mortal, interjected into the discussion. The penalty I have meticulously devised should serve as an unequivocal deterrent. Every human being who recounts or hears this tale will unequivocally grasp that sheer cleverness alone is insufficient to vanquish the gods. But will they truly? Interjected Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, his voice laced with thoughtful skepticism. Sisyphus did not meet his downfall because his intellect proved inadequate. He succumbed because we ultimately resolved to deploy overwhelming, unassailable force to subdue him. That, one must acknowledge, is a distinctly different proposition. And indeed, this nuanced distinction proved to be absolutely pivotal. The Olympian deities did not emerge victorious over Sisyphus through a superior display of intellectual prowess or by ensnaring him within his own intricate web of deceit. They simply invoked their inherent, unchallengeable divine omnipotence to completely override his mortal ingenuity. This particular manner of triumph inadvertently conveyed a message profoundly divergent from their original punitive intent. To fully comprehend the gravity of this distinction, it is imperative to consider the actual operational dynamics of ancient Greek society. The intricate relationship between mortal inhabitants and the divine pantheon was not analogous to the rigid dynamic between enslaved individuals and their masters. Instead, it bore a closer resemblance to the complex interplay between citizens and their governing body, multifaceted, occasionally contentious, yet invariably governed by a set of mutually acknowledged and understood principles. Mortals were expected to venerate the gods, diligently execute prescribed religious rituals, and resignedly accept their predetermined destinies. In reciprocation, the gods were anticipated to demonstrate a reasonable measure of impartiality, to bestow rewards upon virtue, and to diligently uphold the cosmic order. When either party transgressed these established expectations, inevitable and significant complications invariably arose. Sisyphus had flagrantly abrogated his contractual obligations, committing transgressions of a truly spectacular nature. Yet these very violations cast an uncomfortable light upon the divine side of the cosmic ledger. His triumphs in these intricate schemes were not attributable to any inherent supernatural capabilities, but rather stemmed from his meticulous observation of the actual operational mechanics of the celestial system and his shrewd exploitation of its inherent frailties. When he successfully ensnared Thanatos, the very personification of death, he achieved this feat by artfully appealing to the deity's professional pride and innate curiosity. Similarly, when he ingeniously deceived Hades into granting him a temporary reprieve from the afterlife, he expertly leveraged the bureaucratic intricacies of the underworld's administration and the gods' profound respect for the established rituals of proper funeral rites. These were far from mystical interventions. They represented a grand, audacious exercise in social engineering on a truly cosmic scale. Back in the terrestrial realm, a profound discourse is commencing among philosophers and politicians alike, as they begin to dissect the far-reaching implications of Sisyphus's actions. In the bustling intellectual hub of Athens, a nascent philosopher named Democritus is actively formulating groundbreaking theories concerning the fundamental nature of reality, concepts that undeniably owe a measure of inspiration to Sisyphus's audacious example. The central philosophical query being debated is this: if a mere mortal possesses the capacity to comprehend divine systems with sufficient depth to manipulate them, what profound truths does that reveal about the intrinsic character of those very systems? Meanwhile, in the austere military state of Sparta, strategic thinkers are diligently scrutinizing Sisyphus's intricate methodologies. Their inquiries delve into how he managed to pinpoint weaknesses within what were universally perceived as flawless, impregnable systems. Furthermore, they ponder how he maintained such remarkable composure and steadfastness when confronted with the full, terrifying might of divine wrath. These are skills, they posit, that might very well possess significant practical applications in the realm of purely mortal conflicts and geopolitical struggles. The narrative of Sisyphus is rapidly disseminating throughout the entire Greek world, yet it is undergoing a dynamic process of transformation and reinterpretation as it spreads from city to city, polis to polis. Certain renditions of the tale tend to accentuate Sisyphus's egregious hubris and the ultimate inescapable nature of his divine punishment, thereby serving as a stark, cautionary admonition against the inherent perils of daring to challenge the omnipotent Olympian deities. Conversely, other versions of the story choose to focus intently on his extraordinary cleverness and his unyielding persistence, elevating him to a status that borders on that of a heroic, albeit flawed, figure. In the particular rendition of the story, recounted within the democratic confines of Athens, Sisyphus is transmuted into a potent symbol of intellectual freedom and unfettered inquiry. He is portrayed as a man who steadfastly refused to concede that any form of authority, even the seemingly unassailable dominion of the gods, was beyond the purview of rigorous questioning and critical examination. Athenian storytellers, known for their emphasis on reason, meticulously highlight his careful, analytical reasoning, his systematic and methodical approach to surmounting complex problems, and his unwavering willingness to confront and accept the full consequences of his bold and often defiant actions. In the more conservative and rigidly structured society of Sparta, the narrative is articulated with a markedly different emphasis and moral underpinning. Here, Sisyphus is presented as a stark embodiment of the inherent dangers associated with excessive individualism and unbridled self-interest. Spartan versions of the ancient tale underscore how his inherently selfish desire to evade the inevitability of death fundamentally disrupted the natural cosmic order of things and, in doing so, inadvertently caused considerable suffering and disarray for others within the broader scheme of existence. The profound moral lesson embedded within these Spartan renditions is unequivocally centered on the paramount importance of accepting one's predetermined role and responsibilities within the larger, interdependent community. However, perhaps the most profoundly intriguing versions of Sisyphus's story are those shared within the smaller, less prominent cities scattered across Greece, locales such as Corinth itself, where the populace lives under the direct, often oppressive rule of kings and tyrants. In these specific interpretations, Sisyphus evolves into something far more intricate and nuanced. He becomes a cautionary narrative that speaks to the inherent limitations of even the most ingenious and cunning forms of resistance against entrenched power. These local storytellers refrain from unequivocally portraying Sisyphus as either a pure hero or an unadulterated villain. Instead, they present him as a brilliantly astute man who grasped a fundamental and critically important truth about the very nature of power, that all systems, regardless of their immense scale or their seemingly perfect, immutable facade, invariably contain latent weaknesses that can be exploited by an individual who observes with sufficient care and discernment. Yet, these narratives also emphasize the ultimate, inescapable limitation of this approach. While cleverness can indeed exploit existing weaknesses within a system, it fundamentally cannot alter the core distribution of power. Sisyphus possessed the remarkable ability to manipulate the gods, complex bureaucracy, but he could never elevate himself to the status of a god. He could postpone his inevitable fate, but he could not escape it entirely or permanently. This particular interpretation of the Sisyphus narrative deeply resonates with populations who find themselves living under political systems that they are fundamentally unable to directly challenge or overthrow. They profoundly understand the powerful allure of discovering ingenious ways to circumvent or work around an oppressive authority. But they also possess a crucial understanding of the vital importance of recognizing precisely when such endeavors inevitably reach their inherent limits. Back on the celestial heights of Mount Olympus, the Olympian deities themselves are independently arriving at remarkably similar conclusions. The extraordinary case of Sisyphus has compelled them to reflect with greater circumspection and careful consideration upon the precise manner in which they exercise their formidable authority. They have come to the stark realization that appearing foolish or demonstrating incompetence is almost as perilous and damaging to their divine prestige as appearing overtly weak or vulnerable. We must exercise greater caution. Zeus, the king of the gods, ultimately declares with a newfound gravity in his voice. Not because mere mortals pose any genuine existential threat to our eternal dominion, but rather because our authority is, in part, predicated upon their enduring respect and deference Should they ever lose their esteem for our competence and sagacity, they might very well begin testing boundaries that we unequivocally prefer to remain unchallenged and unbreached. This newfound understanding consequently leads to what one might aptly describe as a series of significant reforms within the divine government itself. The gods begin to dedicate considerably more attention to identifying and fortifying the systemic vulnerabilities that Sisyphus so cunningly exploited. Established procedures are rigorously tightened, spheres of divine responsibility are meticulously clarified, and robust checks and balances are swiftly put into place to prevent any future instances of bureaucratic manipulation by resourceful mortals. However, they also implement a more subtle, yet profoundly significant change in their approach. They begin to emphasize and cultivate different virtues in their interactions and engagements with the mortal world. Instead of solely demanding unquestioning obedience and reverent submission, they commence actively rewarding intelligence and genuine innovation, provided that these commendable qualities are directed towards constructive rather than subversive or disruptive ends. The legendary hero Odysseus, for instance, experiences a marked increase in his favor and popularity with the gods during this pivotal period. Much like Sisyphus, Odysseus is celebrated for his extraordinary cleverness and his remarkable ability to devise creative, often ingenious solutions to seemingly impossible problems. But unlike Sisyphus, Odysseus consistently employs these formidable abilities in service of goals that unequivocally receive the gods' approval and blessing. His arduous journey home to his beloved family, the valiant defense of his kingdom, and the crucial maintenance of social order and stability. This fundamental shift in divine policy represents a kind of celestial compromise. The gods, in their infinite wisdom, acknowledge that intelligence and creativity are truly admirable and valuable qualities that should not be suppressed or stifled. However, they also articulate with absolute clarity that these cherished qualities must be utilized responsibly and judiciously, strictly within the established bounds of the cosmic order and divine decree. As countless years gradually pass, the epic story of Sisyphus evolves into a perennial reference point for profound discussions about the intrinsic nature of power, the complexities of resistance, and the inherent limits of both. When a tyrannical ruler becomes excessively oppressive and cruel, people might proverbially remark that he is forcing his subjects to become like Sisyphus, implying that he is inexorably pushing them towards desperate and ultimately self-destructive acts of resistance. Conversely, when a rebel or revolutionary begins to significantly overestimate their chances of achieving success against overwhelming odds, their concerned friends might issue a solemn warning, urging them not to roll the boulder. A poignant phrase that comes to signify the pursuit of a futile, unwinnable struggle that will inevitably culminate in one's own ruin. Yet the narrative also provides a valuable vocabulary and conceptual framework for discussing legitimate and justifiable resistance to authority. When an individual courageously points out fundamental flaws within an established system, or ingeniously discovers creative methods to work around unjust or oppressive rules, they might be lauded and praised for their Sisyphean insight, a profound ability to see beyond the apparent permanence and immutability of power structures, to discern the latent vulnerabilities and weaknesses that lie beneath. In this multifaceted manner, Sisyphus transcends being merely a character confined to a cautionary tale. He transforms into a powerful, enduring symbol of the eternal tension and interplay between authority and intelligence, between raw power and profound wisdom, and between the passive acceptance of the world as it currently exists and the audacious imagination of how it might be fundamentally different. And perhaps this profound duality is precisely why his story continues to resonate with such powerful relevance thousands of years later. We all, as human beings, live within intricate systems of power that sometimes appear overwhelmingly formidable and utterly permanent. We all invariably face moments when we must make a difficult decision, whether to passively accept existing limitations or to boldly test their boundaries. We all, at some point, wonder whether sheer cleverness and unyielding persistence can truly overcome seemingly impossible odds. The enduring story of Sisyphus suggests that the nuanced answer to these perennial questions is, in fact, both yes and no. Yes, intelligence and creative ingenuity are indeed capable of accomplishing truly remarkable feats. They can expose profound weaknesses in even the most powerful and seemingly impregnable systems. They can achieve victories that, at first glance, appear utterly impossible. But no, these hard-won victories may ultimately prove to be ephemeral and impermanent, and the immense cost incurred in achieving them may, in the final analysis, tragically outweigh their fleeting benefits. What then is the appropriate balance to strike in this eternal dilemma? When is it truly worth challenging an established authority, even when the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against you? And conversely, when is it wiser and more prudent to accept existing limitations and diligently work within the confines of established systems? Perhaps the true wisdom, the most profound insight, lies not in rigidly choosing one approach or the other, but rather in cultivating the discerning understanding of precisely when each particular strategy is most appropriate and effective. While Sisyphus relentlessly pushes his eternal boulder through the desolate landscapes of the underworld, let us pause for a moment to embark on an exploratory journey through the vast, intricate, and profoundly complex realm where his perpetual punishment unfolds. For the underworld, it must be understood, is far more than merely a desolate destination where deceased individuals are sent. It constitutes an entire sprawling civilization in its own right, complete with its unique cultural ethos, intricate political structures, and meticulously organized daily routines. Imagine yourself traversing the administrative districts of Hades. What you would encounter is not the fiery, agonizing torment that popular mythology might lead you to expect, but rather an environment that bears a striking resemblance to the government quarter of a bustling, large, mortal city. Here, one observes imposing buildings constructed from smooth, polished black stone, vast corridors lined with countless filing cabinets that stretch upwards beyond the limits of visible perception, and the constant, rhythmic sound of scribes diligently scratching away with their styluses upon an endless multitude of scrolls. The underworld, you see, is burdened with the immense and ceaseless task of processing every single soul that departs from existence anywhere in the entire world. This colossal undertaking generates a staggering, almost inconceivable amount of paperwork. Each individual soul necessitates meticulous evaluation, impartial judgment, and subsequent assignment to its appropriate, predetermined section within the sprawling afterlife. It is an exceedingly complex and meticulously orchestrated operation that demands both scrupulous organization and unwavering attention to the most minute details. At the very epicenter of this elaborate administrative system reside the three revered judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus. These distinguished individuals were, in their earthly lives, powerful mortal kings, chosen specifically for their profound wisdom and unwavering fairness to serve as eternal arbiters of the deceased. They dedicate their endless days and their equally endless nights, though the very concept of time operates in a distinctly different manner within the underworld's ethereal confines, to painstakingly reviewing individual cases and rendering definitive decisions regarding where each soul shall spend its eternity. If one were granted the extraordinary opportunity to observe one of their routine daily case review meetings, one would undoubtedly be astonished by the sheer methodical rigor and profound thoughtfulness that characterizes the entire judicial process. Each judge possesses a distinct area of specialization, focusing on different categories of cases. Minos, for instance, is entrusted with the intricate ethical situations, presiding over the destinies of souls whose earthly lives encompassed particularly difficult and morally ambiguous choices. Rhadamanthus, in contrast, meticulously handles cases involving matters of justice and complex legal disputes. Iacchus, for his part, efficiently manages the more straightforward and less convoluted assessments of souls. In the ethereal chambers of judgment, a significant case unfolded today as the file of a recently deceased merchant from Rhodes came under scrutiny. The man, in his earthly existence, was largely renowned for his upright commercial dealings, his profound dedication to his kin, and his generous endowments to the local temple. Yet a shadow lingered over his legacy. He amassed his considerable wealth by supplying weaponry to both warring factions during a regional conflict, thereby inadvertently prolonging a devastating war that inflicted immense and widespread suffering upon countless souls. Rhadamanthus, one of the three venerable judges, presented his viewpoint with customary gravitas, asserting, "The underlying intention holds paramount importance. His aim was not to perpetuate the strife. He was merely engaged in the ordinary course of commerce, seeking legitimate profit." This argument underscored the subjective nature of the merchant's actions, divorcing them from their ultimate tragic consequences. However, Minos, another discerning judge, swiftly countered this perspective, emphasizing the tangible outcomes. Regardless of his internal motivations, the ultimate effect remained unaltered, Minos declared. He undeniably reaped substantial financial gain from the widespread anguish and devastation, irrespective of his personal intentions. This highlighted the objective reality that profit derived from suffering could not be excused by a lack of malicious intent. Iacchus, known for his pragmatic approach among the three, interjected by drawing attention to a crucial segment within the merchant's voluminous dossier. "Observe closely what he chose to do with these very profits," Iacchus urged. He financed the construction of 3 new educational institutions and established comprehensive medical provisions specifically for orphans left bereft by the war. He channeled funds, regrettably acquired from the throes of conflict, directly into alleviating and healing its very repercussions. This revelation introduced a layer of complexity to the merchant's moral standing. After an extensive discussion that spanned a full hour, the esteemed judges finally rendered their considered verdict. The merchant's soul would be consigned to the middle echelons of the underworld, a realm neither of outright punishment nor of immediate admission to the serene Elysian fields. Here, he would be afforded ample opportunities to atone for the moral liabilities incurred through his wartime profiteering, dedicating himself to service and restitution for other souls. thus balancing the scales of cosmic justice. Such a nuanced and intricate form of judgment is, in fact, characteristic of the underworld's true operational philosophy. Contrary to the pervasive popular narratives of ceaseless torment, the majority of souls encounter consequences that bear a striking resemblance to sophisticated rehabilitation initiatives. The overarching objective is not vindictive retribution or gratuitous cruelty, but rather the meticulous restoration of cosmic equilibrium and the fostering of spiritual growth. Naturally, there exist singular exceptions to this general rule. A select few souls are indeed condemned to truly eternal punishments, yet these are strictly reserved for the most heinous and extreme transgressions. Individuals whose crimes were so fundamentally disruptive that they fractured the very fabric of existence. Figures such as Sisyphus immediately spring to mind. Other infamous inhabitants of perpetual confinement include Tantalus, who committed the unspeakable act of murdering his own progeny and serving his flesh as a macabre feast to the gods, and Ixion, who audaciously attempted to seduce Hera, the venerable consort of Zeus. These were not mere conventional misdeeds. They represented profound violations of the foundational principles that underpin and uphold all reality. Nevertheless, for every soul enduring unending chastisement, there are literally thousands diligently working through more ephemeral consequences for more commonplace human failings. The underworld boasts extensive workshops where souls diligently acquire skills they regrettably neglected or never mastered during their mortal lives. There are specialized counseling centers where individuals painstakingly process the profound psychological harm they inflicted upon others. And in tranquil meditation gardens, souls patiently cultivate virtues such as patience and profound humility, essential for their spiritual evolution. Should one traverse these designated areas, their surprisingly ordinary ambiance would undoubtedly strike an observer. One might witness seasoned warriors, once formidable in battle, meticulously learning the delicate art of weaving, thereby cultivating patience and refined motor control. Former tyrannical rulers are observed collaborating in teams, slowly internalizing the principles of cooperation. Erstwhile misers are seen generously assisting newly arrived souls in acclimating to their unfamiliar surroundings, learning the profound joy of selfless giving. The overseers of these intricate programs are not malevolent demons or monstrous entities. Rather, they are souls who have successfully navigated their own rehabilitative journeys and have voluntarily chosen to remain in the underworld, dedicating themselves to guiding and supporting others. Many among them discover this post-mortal vocation to be immeasurably more fulfilling than any endeavor they pursued during their earthly existence. Among these dedicated supervisors is a former pirate captain named Theron, a man who dedicated 3 decades to the educational workshops, diligently mastering disciplines such as mathematics, engineering, and architecture. Today, he presides over a specialized program that instructs recently arrived souls in the art of construction. Not merely the erection of physical edifices, but the intricate crafting of communities, the cultivation of meaningful relationships, and the foundational building of trust among individuals. The living populace often perceives death as the ultimate cessation, Theron thoughtfully elucidated to a cohort of recent arrivals. However, it is more accurately akin to a graduation ceremony. You have successfully completed the fundamental curriculum of terrestrial existence. Now, the advanced, more profound work truly commences. His words offered a comforting yet challenging perspective on their new reality. His current class comprises a fascinating melange of souls drawn from across the vast expanse of the ancient world. There is a formidable Celtic chieftain, grappling with the realization that brute strength is not invariably the optimal solution to complex dilemmas. An Egyptian scribe, whose brilliance with numerical calculations was tragically offset by his profound ineptitude in human interaction. A Persian merchant, who, while commendably generous with his immediate family, displayed an unyielding ruthlessness towards his commercial rivals. They engage collaboratively on projects meticulously designed to leverage each individual's inherent strengths, while simultaneously compelling them to confront and ameliorate their inherent weaknesses. The Celtic chieftain slowly learns the invaluable skill of actively listening to and valuing the perspectives of others. The Egyptian scribe endeavors to articulate intricate concepts with a clarity that renders them accessible to all. The Persian merchant gradually cultivates a genuine concern for the welfare of individuals he does not personally know, extending his compassion beyond his immediate circle. This transformative process, while undeniably protracted, is by no means unpleasant. A profound sense of satisfaction emanates from the acquisition of novel skills, from a deeper, more comprehensive understanding of one's own inner self, and from the gradual, deliberate evolution into the quintessential person one always possessed the latent potential to become, yet never quite realized during the fleeting span of mortal life. Naturally, not every soul residing within the underworld is engaged in rehabilitation. Those souls who led lives of exemplary virtue proceed directly to the Elysian fields, verdant, peaceful meadows, where they are at liberty to spend eternity precisely as they desire. Many among them, even in this idyllic setting, consciously opt to continue their journey of learning and personal growth, albeit without the structured, mandatory programs necessitated for souls with more significant karmic work yet to accomplish. And then, there are those souls who actively choose the path of reincarnation. After dedicating a requisite period within the underworld, assimilating the lessons they needed to learn, some souls make the profound decision to re-experience mortal life. They approach the fabled river Lethe, whose waters possess the power to erase all prior memories and are subsequently reborn into entirely new existences, replete with fresh opportunities for growth and self-discovery. This multifaceted system engenders an intriguing dynamic throughout the underworld. Certain districts convey a sense of permanence and established tranquility, inhabited by souls who have discovered their eternal abode. Conversely, other areas exude a more transient, academic atmosphere, characterized by a perpetually shifting population of souls diligently progressing towards their subsequent destination. The permanent residents frequently immerse themselves in the intricate administration of the realm. They fulfill vital roles as counselors, educators, guides, and clerks within the vast, intricate bureaucracy that ensures the smooth functioning of everything. Many among them find this service profoundly fulfilling, recognizing their contribution to something far grander than themselves, actively upholding the cosmic order that governs all existence. Yet even within this meticulously organized system, persistent challenges and fervent debates continually arise. The judges regularly convene to scrutinize policies and refine procedures, striving tirelessly to guarantee that justice is administered with unwavering fairness and that the rehabilitative programs consistently achieve their intended efficacy. Of late, their discussions have frequently revolved around the enduring case of Sisyphus and the profound implications his unique punishment holds for the integrity and adaptability of their entire system. The fundamental issue, Minos sagely observed during one of their recent conclaves, is that our established framework was meticulously designed for ordinary souls grappling with ordinary transgressions. We simply did not anticipate an individual who would perceive divine authority as merely another intricate problem to be strategically circumvented or solved. His assessment highlighted the unprecedented nature of Sisyphus's defiance. However, that is precisely why his punishment is so remarkably fitting, Rhadamanthus retorted, his voice imbued with conviction. He dedicated his entire mortal life to attempting to resolve the inherently unsolvable. Now he is granted the eternity to perpetually engage in the very same Sisyphean endeavor. This argument underscored the poetic justice embedded in Sisyphus's fate. Aeacus, ever the pragmatist, introduced a distinct and thought-provoking concern. What transpires, he pondered aloud, if his punishment against all expectations actually proves effective? What if he ultimately internalizes humility and acceptance? In such a scenario, do we then grant him release? This question unveiled a profound philosophical quandary within the underworld's established principles. Indeed, it presents a truly captivating philosophical puzzle. The underworld's comprehensive rehabilitation programs are, by design, intended to ultimately culminate in success, fostering genuine transformation. However, Sisyphus was explicitly sentenced to an eternal punishment, a sentence seemingly devoid of end. What then occurs if the very concept of eternal punishment clashes irreconcilably with the overarching objective of assisting souls in their journey of learning and profound growth? This particular species of philosophical conundrum is precisely the kind of intellectual exercise that sustains the enduring interest of the underworld's permanent residents. They are not merely overseeing a cosmic penitentiary. They are actively participating in an ongoing grand experiment in the very essence of justice, the boundless potential for growth, and the profound possibility of ultimate redemption. As one perambulates through the underworld's tranquil districts during the evening hours, or what approximates evening in a realm devoid of a celestial sun, one might encounter souls from across the vast tapestry of history, engaging in animated discussions on these very profound questions. A venerable Roman philosopher might be observed earnestly debating ethical principles with a sagacious Chinese sage. A Babylonian astronomer could be seen sharing his celestial observations with an astute Egyptian mathematician. A formidable Norse warrior might be found learning invaluable lessons about honor from a wise Polynesian navigator. The underworld, it becomes evident, is far more than a mere terminal destination for the deceased. It is, in essence, a profound arena where the most fundamental questions concerning existence, justice, and the very nature of humanity are rigorously explored by minds liberated from the immediate, pressing exigencies of mortal life. It functions as a sprawling cosmic university. Its curriculum encompassing everything from rudimentary ethics to the intricate, fundamental nature of reality itself. And somewhere within this immense, intricately structured realm, Sisyphus persists in his arduous task of propelling his boulder up the mountain, perhaps, with each ceaseless exertion, gradually internalizing lessons that will one day transmute him into an individual profoundly different from the cunning monarch who once harbored the delusion of outwitting death itself. This vision of the afterlife as a perpetual continuum of learning and profound personal development, rather than a simplistic dichotomy of reward or punishment, invites contemplation. If an individual were granted the gift of eternity to learn and evolve, one might ponder which facets of their being they would prioritize for immediate cultivation and refinement. While the narrative has thus far focused on Sisyphus and his tumultuous relationship with mortality, countless other mortals throughout the ancient Greek world have experienced their own diverse encounters with death. Some of these interactions proved more fortuitous than others. The poignant narrative of Alcestis and Admetus presents a starkly contrasting approach to circumventing death, one fundamentally rooted in profound love and self-sacrifice rather than ingenious cleverness. In the storied kingdom of Pherae and Thessaly reigned King Admetus, a sovereign universally celebrated across Greece for his innate kindness, his unwavering commitment to justice, and his deep reverence for the divine pantheon. In stark contrast to Sisyphus, who appeared to regard the celestial powers as mere obstacles to be outmaneuvered, Admetus harbored a genuine respect for the gods and diligently endeavored to conduct his life in strict accordance with their sacred decrees. The reverence Admetus consistently displayed unexpectedly yielded significant dividends when Apollo, the revered deity of music, prophecy, and the celestial sun, experienced a temporary banishment from the hallowed peaks of Mount Olympus. This exile served as divine retribution for his act of slaying the Cyclopes, the master artisans responsible for forging Zeus's formidable thunderbolts. Consequently, Apollo was sentenced to a year of servitude under a mortal king. With the entire Hellenic realm at his disposal for this penance, the Olympian chose Admetus, a decision that would prove profoundly significant. For a complete annual cycle, the celestial patron of melodies and foresight assumed the humble guise of a shepherd, diligently tending to Admetus, his extensive flocks amidst the rolling hills situated beyond the ancient city of Pherae. One might readily surmise that such an arrangement would present considerable difficulties. A proud, immortal god relegated to the arduous toil of humanity, and a terrestrial monarch grappling with the unprecedented complexities of overseeing a divine servant. Yet, contrary to all expectation, their dynamic flourished with remarkable harmony. Admetus extended to Apollo the identical measure of benevolence and equitable treatment he bestowed upon every one of his subjects. He never harbored an intrusive desire to ascertain which of his pastoral workers might actually be a god in mortal disguise. His unwavering commitment was simply to ensure that all his shepherds, whether celestial or earthly, received ample sustenance, fair compensation for their labor, and the fundamental dignity of respect. Apollo, for his part, embraced his temporary mortal duties with an intensity and fervor that only a deity could muster. Under his meticulous stewardship, Admetus's livestock holdings experienced an unprecedented era of prosperity and abundance. The sheep, benefiting from his divine touch, yielded wool of such exquisite quality that it was lauded as the finest in all Thessaly. The goats produced milk so exceptionally rich and imbued with vitality that it seemed to capture and contain the very essence of sunshine. Even the rustic shelters of the shepherds, typically devoid of embellishment, were subtly transformed into spaces of unforeseen aesthetic charm, as Apollo, by his very nature, instinctively brought harmony and grace to every facet of his earthly interactions. Upon the culmination of his year of compelled service, Apollo found himself genuinely reluctant to depart. He had cultivated a deep affection for the unpretentious, rhythmic cadence of pastoral existence, and harbored profound gratitude for Admetus's unwavering kindness. As a profound token of his appreciation and a parting benediction, he bestowed upon the king an extraordinary gift. When Admetus' own inevitable moment of mortality arrived, he would possess the unique privilege of circumventing death, provided he could secure an individual willing to willingly relinquish their own life in his stead. At that particular juncture, this divine pronouncement appeared to Admetus as a magnanimous, yet largely theoretical concession. The king was then in the vigor of his youth, blessed with robust health, and inherently cautious in his conduct. The specter of death seemed an exceedingly distant and abstract concern. He offered Apollo his gracious thanks, but subsequently relegated the matter to the periphery of his thoughts, scarcely pondering its profound implications. The ensuing years unfolded in tranquil succession. Admetus entered into a matrimonial bond with Alcestis, the esteemed daughter of King Peleus, a union that necessitated Admetus's completion of a seemingly impossible task, harnessing both a ferocious lion and a wild boar to a single chariot. Apollo, still harboring a deep and abiding gratitude for Admetus's earlier benevolence, clandestinely intervened to aid him in accomplishing this formidable feat. Their marriage proved exceptionally felicitous, blessed abundantly with both cherished progeny and widespread prosperity. Nevertheless, as is the ineluctable fate of all mortals, Admetus's predestined hour eventually arrived. His demise was not occasioned by the ravages of war or an unforeseen accident, but rather by the sudden onset of a debilitating illness that tragically struck him down in what should have been the very prime of his existence. As he lay gravely ill, with even the most eminent physicians in all of Greece utterly powerless to alleviate his suffering, he vividly recalled Apollo's extraordinary endowment, the contingent possibility of finding someone prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in his place. The condition, when Apollo first articulated it, had seemed deceptively straightforward. Now, however, Admetus was confronted with the profound intricacies and ethical quandaries it truly entailed. How, indeed, does one approach another human being with a request so utterly immense as to ask them to surrender their life for one's own? How could such a macabre and morally fraught topic even be introduced into a civil conversation without causing utter consternation? His initial contemplation turned towards his aged parents. They had, he reasoned, lived full and extensive lives, and might conceivably be willing to undertake this supreme sacrifice for their son. With considerable reluctance and profound embarrassment, he approached his father. "Father," he began, grappling visibly for the appropriate words, "I have a favor to implore, a service of immense magnitude." When Admetus finally articulated his desperate predicament, his father listened with a thoughtful and somber demeanor. Then, with a tone that was both gentle and unequivocally firm, he delivered his refusal. "My son," he declared, "I cherish you dearly, but I am not yet prepared to depart from this world. There remain aspirations I wish to fulfill, horizons I long to witness. I have indeed lived a lengthy life, yet I am far from finished with the experience of living it." His mother, when approached, offered an analogous response. While she expressed deep sympathy for his plight, she too felt that her life's narrative was not yet complete. There were grandchildren whose growth she yearned to observe, gardens she wished to continue tending, and stories she intended to bring to their conclusion. Admetus found himself in the peculiar and unsettling position of experiencing disappointment in his parents for their entirely natural desire to continue their earthly existence. It struck him, in a fleeting moment of self-absorption, as somewhat selfish that individuals who had already enjoyed such extensive longevity would not sacrifice themselves for a younger member of their lineage. Yet simultaneously, he could not genuinely fault them, for who among humanity willingly embraces a premature cessation of life, even for those they hold most dear? He subsequently extended his desperate quest, approaching his most intimate companions, his most devoted retainers, and even more distant relatives. The ensuing conversations were marked by an indescribable degree of awkwardness. The sheer impossibility of phrasing such a request tormented him. "Would you mind departing this life so that I might continue mine?" sounded abhorrent, regardless of the verbal embellishments. Some individuals resorted to flimsy excuses, while others offered categorical refusals. A select few appeared to give the matter serious consideration before ultimately recoiling from the ultimate sacrifice. Universally, all those he approached regarded Admetus with a subtly altered perception thereafter, as if the mere audacity of his inquiry had irrevocably transformed the very nature of their relationship. As the relentless march of days continued, and his debilitating condition steadily worsened, Admetus began to succumb to profound despondency. Apollo's divine gift, which had once seemed so extraordinarily generous, was now proving utterly ineffectual. The devastating conclusion he drew was that, apparently, no one loved him with sufficient intensity to willingly die for him, a realization that was, in its emotional torment, almost more agonizing than the grim prospect of impending mortality itself. It was precisely at this pivotal juncture that Alcestis, his beloved wife and queen, made a momentous decision that would ensure her renown across all of Greece for centuries to come. She approached him quietly one twilight evening as he lay weak and fevering in their marital chamber. The room was cast in a subdued glow, illuminated solely by the flickering oil lamps that projected ephemeral dancing shadows upon the walls. Outside, the customary sounds of the city were gradually subsiding, settling into the tranquil rhythms of nocturnal serenity. "I have been profoundly contemplating your predicament," she articulated, as she sat gently beside him and tenderly clasped his hand. "Do not," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please, I implore you, do not. I cannot possibly ask you to undertake such a burden." "You are not asking," she responded with a serene yet resolute tone. "I am offering." The ensuing colloquy was unlike anything chronicled in the tales of Sisyphus's cunning stratagems. There was an absolute absence of perfidy, manipulation, or any attempt to unearth legalistic loopholes or exploit technicalities. It was simply a devoted wife, driven by profound affection for her husband, articulating her deeply personal rationale for her willingness to embrace death so that he might continue to live. "Our children unequivocally need a father," she stated with unwavering conviction. "The kingdom requires its king, and I would far rather experience a shorter life, filled with the comforting knowledge that you remain in this world, than endure a prolonged existence overshadowed by the indelible sorrow of your demise. Admetus, in his desperation, attempted to remonstrate with her, to explore alternative courses of action, to persuade her to revoke her solemn vow. However, Alcestis had made up her mind with the same quiet, unyielding determination that characterized all her significant decisions. Her momentous choice stemmed not from despair or fleeting impulse. Rather, it was the meticulously reasoned calculus of a woman whose profound comprehension of conjugal affection and royal obligation guided her every action. The actual exchange of lives transpired with a surprising and poignant gentleness. Thanatos, the divine personification of death, manifested within their private sanctuary, much as he had once appeared in Sisyphus's palace. Yet this time there were no chains, no deceptive ploys, no desperate attempts at bargaining. Alcestis simply rose from her seat, imparted a final, tender kiss to her husband, and walked away with death with an almost mundane equanimity, as naturally as if she were merely going to visit a neighboring acquaintance. Admetus experienced an instantaneous and complete convalescence. Apollo's divine munificence worked with precise efficacy, exactly as it had been promised. The very moment Alcestis's life concluded, his debilitating illness vanished, and his strength was fully rejuvenated. However, this profound victory over death felt utterly devoid of any triumphal resonance. He was indeed alive, but at an exorbitant cost that rendered his newly granted existence almost insupportable. The citizenry of Pheerae mourned Alcestis with a depth of collective lamentation they had never before evinced for any individual. Her unique genesis of demise was not due to an inadvertent mishap, a debilitating ailment, or the natural senescence of old age. She had died from an act of profound, selfless love, sacrificing herself for the enduring welfare of her lineage and sovereign territory. Her funeral rites transcended mere mourning, transforming into a solemn veneration of the highest moral attributes humanity could aspire to achieve. Yet the narrative of Alcestis and Admetus does not conclude at this juncture. For unlike Sisyphus's solitary struggle against the primordial cosmic forces, Alcestis's profound self-renunciation touched the emotional sensibilities of both gods and mortals alike. Her altruistic deed generated far-reaching repercussions that extended well beyond the immediate ambit of her own family. Tidings of her unparalleled heroism eventually reached Heracles, the celebrated demigod and hero, who was then traveling through Pheerae en route to fulfilling one of his legendary labors. Upon his arrival at Admetus's royal domain, he discovered his longtime compatriot immersed in profound sorrow, extending perfunctory hospitality to his guests, his spirit visibly shattered by grief. Heracles, who had faced monstrous entities, confronted deities, and overcome insurmountable tribulations, was deeply moved by the poignant narrative of Alcestis's sacrifice. Here, he realized, was an individual who had achieved a triumph over death itself, not through physical might or ingenious stratagem, but through the unadulterated power of pure love. It struck him as fundamentally unjust that such an extraordinary conquest should ultimately culminate in tragedy. Consequently, Heracles made an audacious resolution, one that would have appeared utterly inconceivable to anyone familiar only with the narrative of Sisyphus's cunning. He definitively chose to engage Thanatos, death personified, in direct physical confrontation, determined to reclaim the stolen essence that death had claimed. The epic battle between Heracles and Thanatos transpired in the liminal interstice between existence and oblivion, in a shadowy realm where sheer physical prowess yielded precedence to an indomitable force of will. Heracles fought not for self-aggrandizement, nor for glory or material accretion, but for the profound principle that such profound affection as Alcestis's deserved vindication and should not remain unrewarded. And somehow, impossibly, he achieved triumph. His victory was attained not through subterfuge or legalistic circumvention, but through unadulterated tenacity, propelled by an unwavering moral certitude. Thanatos, confronted by an adversary driven solely by altruistic devotion rather than self-serving ambition, found himself utterly unable to maintain his dominion over Alcestis's spiritual essence. When Heracles triumphantly restored Alcestis to corporeal existence and reunited her with her adoring spouse, it represented a fundamentally different kind of victory over mortality than Sisyphus had achieved. Where Sisyphus had sought to evade death through cleverness and guile, Alcestis had embraced death through the transcendent power of love, and love, as it definitively turned out, proved to be stronger than either intellectual guile or the finality of demise itself. The reunion of Alcestis and Admetus, a tale of profound devotion, attained widespread renown throughout the ancient Hellenic lands, though not in the manner one might typically anticipate. It was not lauded as a feat of extraordinary valor or as a consequence of celestial intercession, but rather it became an enduring demonstration that genuine self-sacrifice and an unwavering love possess an inherent might, a formidable power that even the inexorable grasp of death must acknowledge and command reverence for. As dusk descends upon the regal abode of Pheres, with Alcestis and Admetus observing their progeny engaged in playful frolic within the palace courtyard, one might find themselves contemplating the profound divergence between this narrative and the notorious saga of Sisyphus. Both accounts involve mortal beings grappling with the inevitability of demise, yet they do so through diametrically opposed methodologies. Sisyphus, with his individual sagacity, endeavored to outwit death, perceiving it as an intricate conundrum to be unraveled through superior intellectual prowess. Alcestis, conversely, willingly embraced death through love, viewing it as an altruistic offering that could serve a more transcendent purpose. One approach, driven by cunning, led to perpetual retribution, an eternal cycle of futility. The other, born of profound affection, culminated in a miraculous restoration to life and an abiding contentment. These divergent narratives compel us to ponder the fundamental essence of mortality, the profound affections that bind us, and the critical choices we are compelled to make when confronted with predicaments of insurmountable difficulty. Which approach, the astute self-preservation of Sisyphus or the benevolent self-abnegation of Alcestis, ultimately demonstrates a more profound understanding of the human condition and what it truly signifies to exist. Having borne witness to love's triumph over mortality in the poignant story of Alcestis, let us now venture into an alternative strategy for confronting the insurmountable, one that relies neither on intellectual cunning, as exemplified by Sisyphus, nor on altruistic surrender, as embodied by Alcestis, but rather on the unadulterated potency of aesthetic creation and melody. Envision a scene amidst the verdant undulations of Thrace in northern Greece, where the most exquisite harmonies known to humankind reverberate through the expansive vales. This enchanting music emanates from Orpheus, the prodigious offspring of the revered muse Calliope, and widely acclaimed as the preeminent minstrel of all epochs. When Orpheus performs his lyre and vocalizes his harmonious symphony, even feral creatures congregate in tranquil repose to lend an ear. Arboreal giants dislodge their roots from the earth, compelled to move closer to the source of his captivating music. Indeed, such is the unrivaled aesthetic resonance of his melodies that even inanimate rocks shed tears in appreciation. Yet, on this particular eve, an uncharacteristic stillness pervades the Thracian landscape. Orpheus is discovered poised beside a solemn resting place, his unplayed instrument reposing gently in his lap, his gaze fixedly upon the soil that enshrouds his cherished spouse, Eurydice. This pervasive quietude possesses a deeper resonance than any musical composition he has ever created, for it represents the vast, aching chasm created by the void, the absence of the singular individual whose vocal inflections he held dearer than his own utterance. Eurydice had met her untimely end on the very day of their nuptials, not succumbing to infirmity or the natural progression of years, but rather falling victim to the lethal venom of a serpent's bite as she fled the unwelcome overtures of an insistent suitor. The cataclysmic event was abrupt, illogical, and utterly devastating. One fleeting instant, she had radiated mirth at the festivities of their marital union, her countenance beaming with unadulterated delight. The next, she had vanished into the ether, leaving Orpheus abandoned to the solace of his melodies and the torment of his profound sorrow. Throughout the ensuing days, Orpheus had endeavored to vocalize his anguish, sought to discover a harmonious arrangement capable of articulating the depths of his emotional turmoil. But each composition invariably transmuted into a dirge of such poignant despair that even he found himself unable to sustain its utterance. The artistic expression that once bestowed elation upon all who heard it now served merely to intensify his profound melancholy. While enshrouded in the deepening gloom, Orpheus forged a momentous resolution, a choice destined either to bring about his utter ruin or to manifest the utterly unattainable. He decided to undertake what no living person had ever dared. He would embark upon an expedition to the chthonic realm, the underworld itself, and petition Hades to restore his consort to the vivacious world. In stark contrast to Sisyphus, who meticulously devised stratagems to circumvent his own mortality, Orpheus harbors no intention of deception. Nor, unlike Alcestis, is he poised to offer his life as a testament to affection. His blueprint is characterized by a more straightforward, yet arguably more daring, quality than either predecessor. He intends to serenade the deities of the infernal regions, harboring the fervent aspiration that his melodic art might achieve what raw power and intellectual acuity are incapable of. His perilous odyssey into the netherworld commences at one of the fabled portals to the dominion of the deceased, a formidable grotto nestled within the mountainous terrain, where the encroaching tenebrosity appears to plunge to depths far exceeding any terrestrial cavity. Orpheus ventures into this abyssal gloom, bearing solely his cherished lyre, traversing routes that mortal footsteps were never intended to tread. The initial formidable impediment confronting him manifests as Charon, the venerable boatman of the river Styx. Charon's directives are unequivocally clear. Only those who have passed into the afterlife are permitted to traverse the river, and a requisite toll must be tendered for passage. Orpheus, undeniably a living being, possesses no obols for the required transit. Retrace your steps, Charon intones with a voice resonant of water eroding ancient rock. Mortals possess no legitimate purpose within the dominion of the departed. Rather than engaging in disputation or attempting to negotiate terms, Orpheus simply commences his melodic outpouring. His composition recounts the profound narrative of affection. It encompasses not merely his personal devotion to Eurydice, but the myriad manifestations of this potent emotion, the tender bond of maternal affection for children, the unwavering loyalty of companions who stand by each other through adversity, and the deep appreciation mortals harbor for the exquisite world into which they are born and from which they must ultimately depart. As his voice resonates through the somber air, an utterly astonishing phenomenon transpires. Charon, who for untold millennia had conveyed spectral passengers across the Styx with an impassive demeanor, discovers rivulets of moisture tracing paths down his time-worn visage. The melody does not beguile him, nor coerce him into transgressing established ordinances. It merely penetrates his being with such profound emotional force that he finds himself utterly incapable of denying transit to the minstrel. "Perform once more upon your homeward journey," Charon murmurs softly as Orpheus embarks upon his vessel. "I have lost all recollection of the essence of aesthetic auditory experience." This identical paradigm reoccurs with striking regularity as Orpheus penetrates further into the subterranean realm. Every sentinel, every impediment, every preternatural confrontation is surmounted not by brute strength or cunning artifice, but by the undeniable potency of his lyrical craft. Cerberus, the formidable tripartite canine guardian of Hades' portals, reclines and seals his 6 ocular orbs as Orpheus vocalizes a soothing melody concerning the tranquility that follows a lengthy period of devoted duty. The hound's 3 maws, which have instilled terror in innumerable spirits, gently curve into an approximation of genial expressions. The Furies, those dread goddesses of retribution who relentlessly hound the culpable, suspend their perpetual pursuit to attend a composition extolling pardon and absolution. For the inaugural moment in their immemorial existence, they apprehend an emotion distinct from wrath. Even the perpetually agonizing spirits within the underworld discover a fleeting respite from their ceaseless torments. Tantalus, condemned to perpetually grasp at receding sustenance and hydration, momentarily disregards his gnawing hunger and parching thirst while enraptured by Orpheus's harmonies. Sisyphus, engaged in his unending exertion of propelling the colossal stone uphill, intermits his eternal toil, permitting the massive rock to settle as he immerses himself in the sublime artistry of the music. Tidings of the mortal minstrel disseminate with remarkable alacrity throughout the underworld. Disembodied spirits congregate along Orpheus's trajectory, captivated by melodies that evoke recollections of every exquisite aspect they had forsaken in their earthly existence. The dominion of the departed had, until this moment, been utterly unacquainted with such unparalleled sonic wonders. Ultimately, Orpheus attains the majestic audience chamber of Hades and Persephone, the formidable sovereign and queen of the infernal regions. This is the very court Sisyphus once beguiled with his administrative shrewdness, the identical potentates Alcestis confronted through an act of voluntary immolation. However, Orpheus presents himself before them by means of unadulterated artistic articulation. Positioned before the dual regal seats, Orpheus commences his paramount vocal rendition. He vocalizes the narrative of Eurydice, delving beyond the mere anguish of her forfeiture to encapsulate the profound depth of his affection for her. He serenades the particularity of her laughter at his jests, even those of questionable humor. The manner in which she would softly vocalize melodies as he performed, not always in perfect pitch, yet invariably with unalloyed delight. The characteristic way she perceived the cosmos with an inquisitive spirit and inherent benevolence. Yet, transcending these intimate details, he elevates his theme to love itself, positing it as an elemental force woven into the fabric of the universe. He extols how love engenders aesthetic splendor, stimulates evolution, and interweaves all animated existence. His voice then shifts to lament the pathos of affection abruptly severed, and the lamentable squandering of comeliness obliterated prematurely. As his voice fills the hallowed space, an occurrence of unparalleled novelty unfolds within the stately audience chamber of the deceased. Persephone, the regal consort of the underworld, begins to shed tears. These are not mere lacrimal expressions of sorrow, but rather tears of profound empathy and recollection. She is transported back to her own tale of devotion, her own poignant severance from the vibrant realm of flourishing life above. Even Hades, the austere deity presiding over the departed, who has observed every conceivable iteration of human anguish, discovers his stoic resolve wavering. He has been privy to innumerable catastrophes, yet he has never encountered them transmuted into such exquisite artistry. The melodic narrative does not repudiate the stark finality of death, nor endeavor to intellectually dispute its existence. Instead, it eloquently demonstrates how profound affection can forge significance even when confronted with insurmountable bereavement. Upon the cessation of the sublime melody, an extended hush descends upon the throne room. Then Hades articulates his thoughts, his voice imbued with a softness uncharacteristic of millennia. "Orpheus," he pronounces, "your musical prowess has accomplished a feat I would have deemed utterly unattainable. You have infused the dominion of mortality with aesthetic splendor. And in this act, you have imparted a poignant reminder that even demise can possess a certain beauty when it is inextricably woven into a grander tapestry of affection." Persephone inclines herself forward upon her regal seat. "We shall restore Eurydice to your keeping," she declares. Your profound devotion for her, magnificently articulated through your artistic medium, has unequivocally demonstrated a potency surpassing that of death itself. Orpheus struggles to fully comprehend the momentous pronouncements he receives. While Sisyphus's intellectual stratagems ultimately proved futile, and Alcestis's act of self-immolation necessitated celestial intervention for its successful resolution, his unique musical artistry has, by its inherent might, achieved the seemingly insurmountable. However, Hades then elevates his hand. There exists a singular stipulation, he articulates, and at once Orpheus perceives the oppressive burden of divine restriction descending upon his monumental victory. Eurydice shall accompany your journey back to the vibrant domain of the living, yet you are expressly forbidden from casting your gaze backward upon her until both of you have entirely exited our subterranean dominion. Should you turn to behold her before attaining the terrestrial surface, she shall be irrevocably forfeited to you for all eternity. The divine decree presented a paradox, simultaneously logical and utterly baffling. One might ponder the capricious nature of the deities, bestowing such an extraordinary boon, yet encumbering it with an almost insurmountable caveat. Nevertheless, Orpheus, a figure of profound determination, refrained from any discourse or protest. His arduous odyssey had already taken him to unprecedented depths, and his accomplishments were far too significant to imperil by challenging the celestial will with interrogations. With a burgeoning sense of elation and profound optimism, the ascent toward the world above commenced. Orpheus distinctly perceived Eurydice's ethereal footsteps trailing him, an undeniable testament to her proximity as she followed him through the labyrinthine, shadowy passageways that promised a return to vitality. Their upward trajectory led them past every landmark where his melodious artistry had woven its enchantment during their descent. The formidable guardian Cerberus remained in a tranquil slumber. The vengeful Furies maintained their hushed repose, and the souls previously subjected to endless suffering continued their respite from their eternal toils. Yet, with every upward stride, as they drew nearer to the precarious threshold separating mortality from the realm of the departed, an insidious uncertainty began to infiltrate the musician's thoughts. The comforting auditory cues he had initially perceived seemed to dissipate. He could no longer discern the gentle rhythm of Eurydice's respiration, nor the faint whisper of her voice. A chilling apprehension seized him. Could the Olympian deities have perpetrated a cruel deception? Was he, in truth, merely traversing these desolate passages in solitary pilgrimage, deluding himself into believing his beloved spouse was at his side, while she remained irrevocably ensnared in the infernal depths? This gnawing skepticism intensified with every laborious footfall. He found himself desperately straining his faculties, yearning for any auditory confirmation of her genuine presence. The subtle rustle of her raiment, a faint, wistful sigh, or even the soft cadence of weeping. Anything that would unequivocally dispel the tormenting fear of betrayal. Ultimately, with the threshold of the living world mere paces away, and the culmination of his seemingly impossible quest within his grasp, Orpheus's unwavering resolve shattered. Overcome by an insatiable, desperate yearning for ocular proof, he impulsively pivoted, compelled to ascertain with his own vision the corporeal reality of Eurydice, and thereby validate his monumental achievement. And indeed, she materialized before him, ethereal in her beauty, imbued with profound sorrow, and already succumbing to an irreversible dissolution. As the inexorable divine prohibition asserted its dominion, she extended a spectral hand, endeavoring to caress his visage one final time, her translucent digits passing through his flesh with the ephemeral quality of vapor. "Why?" she murmured, her voice a fragile wisp of sound. Immediately thereafter, her form dissolved completely, inexorably drawn back into the abyssal chasm by primordial powers that transcended even the formidable strength of ardent affection or the enchanting allure of his melodies. In a desperate, futile endeavor, Orpheus attempted to retrace his steps into the netherworld, but the very pathways that had miraculously yielded to his influence earlier now stood impenetrably sealed. His unparalleled musical prowess, which had effortlessly surmounted every impediment during his initial descent, proved utterly ineffectual in forging a subsequent passage to the realm of the deceased. The divine entities had bestowed upon him a singular, extraordinary grace, only for his inherent human skepticism to tragically nullify it. He resurfaced into the vibrant embrace of the sun-drenched world in solitary anguish, burdened by the crushing realization that he had approached the very precipice of vanquishing death closer than any mortal before him. Yet it was his own intrinsic fallibility that had snatched catastrophic failure from the very brink of glorious triumph. For the remainder of his earthly existence, Orpheus roamed the terrestrial sphere, ceaselessly creating melodies that surpassed in both exquisite beauty and poignant sorrow anything ever conceived by human ear before or since. His lamentable compositions recounted the epic narrative of his perilous voyage to the underworld, a testament to an ardent love that had nearly subdued the finality of demise, and a somber reflection on the pervasive human propensity to sabotage our most profound achievements through the corrosive forces of apprehension and misgiving. However, it might be contended that Orpheus's true, enduring victory was not the fleeting, ephemeral reunion with Eurydice, but rather the transcendent power of his music itself. His poignant ballads, imbued with themes of affection and profound bereavement, continue to resonate deeply within human hearts, long after his corporeal presence has vanished. In a profound sense, his artistic legacy accomplished what his personal quest could not. It transmuted profound tragedy into something exquisitely beautiful and perpetually resonant, an enduring creation that profoundly touches the spirits of others and extends solace to those grappling with their own inevitable sorrows. Contemplating Orpheus's tragic misstep at the very zenith of his impending triumph, one is compelled to ponder the underlying motivations. Was his fateful backward glance merely a manifestation of inherent personal frailty? Or did it signify the quintessential human condition, an irresistible surge of doubt and an instinctive yearning for empirical validation asserting itself at the most pivotal juncture? Furthermore, what profound insights does his timeless narrative impart regarding the intricate interplay between artistic creation, the transformative power of love, and the most fundamental, often unfulfilled, aspirations of the human spirit? The ongoing exploration of the multifaceted strategies employed by mortals in their audacious defiance of death now culminates in the examination of the most unvarnished and confrontational methodology conceivable. The sheer subjugation of Thanatos through an overwhelming display of corporeal might and unyielding resolve. This formidable technique epitomizes the approach of Heracles, universally acknowledged as the preeminent champion of Hellenic antiquity, whose direct engagement with the personification of death stands as the quintessential crucible for testing the indomitable spirit of humanity against the inexorable power of cosmic decree. Let us transport our collective imagination to the verdant hills bordering Pheræ, the very locale where, in a previous account, we witnessed Alcestis and Admetus flourishing contentedly subsequent to her astonishing resurrection from the clutches of death. However, our present narrative necessitates a chronological regression to the precise juncture when Heracles first became cognizant of Alcestis's profound act of self-immolation, and, recognizing the unparalleled devotion, resolved that such an extraordinary display of affection ought not to remain uncompensated. Heracles, the formidable demigod, arrived at the majestic residence of Admetus during the waning hours of the afternoon, his physique caked with the dust of extensive peregrination. His spirits were elevated by the prospect of enjoying the customary generosity and fellowship offered by a venerable companion. This interlude found him situated between his monumental labors, having recently concluded the perilous capture of the formidable Erymanthian boar, and poised on the precipice of his subsequent, equally inconceivable undertaking These brief respites interspersed between his fabled exploits were exceedingly cherished by him, representing fleeting periods when he could almost momentarily shed the mantle of a hero perpetually destined to validate his worth through an unending succession of trials, and instead experience the semblance of an ordinary existence. However, upon his arrival at the royal dwelling, an unsettling anomaly immediately registered with Heracles. The customary vibrant cacophony characteristic of a thriving regal court was conspicuously absent, replaced by a profound hush. Attendants glided through the corridors with hushed movements, their voices reduced to barely audible murmurs. The entire ambiance was oppressively saturated with a palpable sorrow, though Heracles, at that precise moment, remained unable to pinpoint the specific calamity that had befallen the household. Admetus himself extended a somber welcome at the entrance, and Heracles was utterly taken aback by the dramatic deterioration in his friend's visage. The monarch appeared as if he had endured the ravages of many years within the mere month that had elapsed since their last encounter. His countenance was starkly emaciated, his eyes inflamed and reddened from ceaseless lamentation, and his gait suggested a man burdened by an invisible, insupportable affliction. "My esteemed friend?" Heracles inquired, his voice laced with concern. "What grievous misfortune has transpired within these walls?" Admetus grappled profoundly for suitable words, the weight of his singular sorrow rendering articulation almost impossible. How could one adequately convey the agonizing truth that his beloved consort had willingly surrendered her life to preserve his own? How could he possibly delineate the unique, torturous species of bereavement that arose from surviving at the ultimate expense of another's demise? "There has indeed been a profound loss," Admetus eventually uttered, his voice strained. "A truly calamitous event. But I implore you, as my cherished guest, let us divert our conversation to topics less somber." Faithful to the sacrosanct tenets of Hellenic Xenia, Admetus valiantly endeavored to cloak his overwhelming grief, striving to furnish his distinguished visitor with appropriate diversion and comfort. Consequently, a sumptuous banquet was meticulously arranged. Generous libations of wine were poured, and court musicians performed, albeit their melodies resonated with a forced, melancholic air, utterly devoid of genuine merriment. Heracles, acutely perceptive of his companion's profound anguish, yet deferential to his need for discretion, conscientiously attempted to dissipate the oppressive gloom by recounting tales of his recent heroic exploits and prodigious feats. Inevitably, however, the poignant narrative could not remain perpetually concealed. A palace servant, profoundly affected by Heracles's palpable and unfeigned solicitude, eventually divulged the comprehensive account of Alcestis's supreme sacrifice, how she had, with unparalleled volition, offered her own existence to safeguard her husband's, how she had departed alongside the somber figure of death with a serene composure, akin to merely embarking upon a visit to a neighboring acquaintance, and how the royal abode had been enshrouded in an unbroken pall of lamentation from that moment onward. Upon assimilating the harrowing details of the tragedy, Heracles's response was both instantaneous and profoundly vehement. This was not simply a manifestation of sorrow for the premature demise of a virtuous woman. It was an incandescent fury ignited by the sheer inequity of the situation. Alcestis, in his estimation, embodied the pinnacle of human excellence. Her actions were a testament to boundless love, selfless sacrifice, unswerving fidelity, and indomitable bravery. The notion that such an exemplar of humanity should be forcibly seized by death, while innumerable individuals characterized by cruelty and self-interest were permitted prolonged existences, struck him as a fundamental and intolerable perversion of justice. "Where, pray tell, has she been interred?" He pressed the servant, his voice taut with indignation. "She has not, my lord." The servant responded with a mournful shake of the head. Death, in his own terrible person, claimed her. Her corporeal form simply dissipated into nothingness as she accompanied him, leaving absolutely no remains for interment. This particular harrowing detail served only to fuel Heracles's already volcanic indignation. Not only had death mercilessly snatched a woman of profound virtue prematurely from the world, but he had moreover cruelly deprived her grieving family of the solace afforded by customary funeral ceremonies. It was an egregious affront, a deliberate act of contempt that compounded the already unbearable sorrow of the tragedy. Heracles, a being whose life had been a perpetual testament to the conquest of the seemingly insurmountable, then forged a resolution that would have appeared utterly preposterous to any ordinary mortal. He determined to relentlessly pursue Thanatos, the very embodiment of mortality, and forcibly reclaim that which death had illicitly appropriated. Diverging sharply from the cunning stratagems of Sisyphus, who relied upon ingenious artifice and deceptive ploys, or the evocative harmonies of Orpheus, who wielded the compelling force of melody, Heracles unequivocally resolved to employ his paramount attributes, his colossal physical might, and his unyielding categorical refusal to countenance vanquishment. His audacious intention was to engage the very deity of death in a titanic struggle, compelling the cosmic force of demise into utter submission. Locating Thanatos, however, presented the initial formidable hurdle in Heracles's unprecedented quest. The personification of death possessed no permanent abode, nor did he adhere to any predictable itinerary or fixed schedule of appearances. He manifested himself spontaneously, precisely at the moment and location when an individual's allotted span of existence drew to its close, only to dematerialize instantaneously, vanishing to fulfill the subsequent engagement on his interminable roster of claims. Yet, Heracles, through the crucible of his innumerable heroic enterprises, had cultivated an extraordinary aptitude for tracing entities that actively sought to evade detection. He meticulously pursued the faint, almost imperceptible indicators that delineated death's fleeting transit across the mortal plane, sites where vibrant flora inexplicably withered, where creatures of the wild grew agitated and disquieted, and where the customary songs of avifauna fell silent. The omnipresent, yet often unseen, manifestation of death left an indelible, almost spiritual imprint, a spectral residue that Heracles, endowed with preternaturally sharpened faculties, was uniquely equipped to perceive. The elusive trail ultimately guided him to a pivotal crossroads situated beyond the city's confines, a convergence point where multiple pathways intersected beneath the venerable branches of an ancient olive tree. This particular locale was renowned as one of the consecrated sites where Thanatos habitually manifested to mortals whose mortal coil was destined to unravel, a liminal, neutral territory existing between the vibrant pulse of life and the stillness of demise, a conduit between the ephemeral human realm and the profound mysteries that lay beyond. As twilight descended, painting the heavens with hues of fading light, Heracles took up his solitary vigil beneath the gnarled canopy of the olive tree. His wait proved remarkably brief. With the final vestiges of daylight receding from the firmament, a spectral figure coalesced from the encroaching gloom, tall, enveloped in a somber cloak, and emanating an undeniable aura of ultimate, unchallengeable dominion. "Thanatos!" Heracles declared, his voice resonant with purpose as he rose deliberately to his full stature. "Heracles," Death responded, his tone devoid of any discernible astonishment. "I have, in fact, anticipated your arrival." "Then you are fully aware of the imperative that has brought me to this juncture," Heracles rejoined. "You seek my intervention to restore Alcestis to the realm of the living," Thanatos articulated, his voice a low, immutable pronouncement. "But such is not the immutable design of death, heroic mortal. I do not relinquish that which I have irrevocably claimed." "We shall ascertain the veracity of that assertion," Heracles retorted, and with a primal roar, he propelled himself forward, launching his immense frame directly at the deity of death. The ensuing confrontation transcended any conflict ever witnessed or even conceived within the annals of mortal comprehension. Far from being a mere exhibition of brute force, though Heracles indeed unleashed the entirety of his fabled superhuman might, this was a primordial clash. It represented nothing less than a titanic struggle between the elemental, opposing forces of vitality and extinction, enacted through the direct engagement of two formidable personages who embodied the absolute zenith of their inherent cosmic capabilities. Thanatos, the embodiment of mortality's relentless conclusion, wields the inherent force of dissolution, the inexorable power of entropy that inevitably guides all existence toward its ultimate cessation. His chilling touch possesses the capacity to drain vitality from even the most robust beings, while his very presence can effortlessly sow the seeds of profound despair. Indeed, his eternal being serves as a stark and unyielding testament to the inherent futility of every transient struggle waged by mortals. Conversely, Heracles engages this formidable adversary with an equally potent, albeit vastly different might, the quintessential human refusal to acquiesce to the seemingly unalterable and unacceptable. His heroic persona transcends mere prodigious physical capabilities, embodying instead the profound moral fortitude that propels individuals to confront profound injustices, even when confronted by overwhelmingly insurmountable odds. His extraordinary power emanates not solely from his legendary musculature, but from an unshakable, absolute conviction that certain principles and beings are undeniably worthy of unwavering defense, irrespective of any potential dire consequences. The epic struggle unfolded fiercely throughout the encompassing darkness of the night. The two titanic figures grappled intensely beneath the ancient olive tree, their ferocious combat so profound that it caused the very earth to tremble beneath them, and the ambient air itself to visibly shimmer with the sheer, raw energy unleashed. At various junctures, Thanatos appeared to gain a decisive advantage, and Heracles could keenly sense his formidable strength gradually diminishing, his very life force inexorably drawn toward the vast, terrifying void that death inherently represents. Yet each time he found himself precariously balanced on the precipice of utter defeat, Heracles would summon to mind the poignant image of Alcestis, her quiet, steadfast courage, her profound and willing self-sacrifice, and her enduring love for her cherished family. He would also reflect upon Admetus's profound and agonizing grief, and the inherent injustice of virtuous individuals suffering needlessly, while the vast, indifferent cosmic order remained entirely unperturbed by individual anguish. These deeply resonant thoughts served as an inexhaustible wellspring, fueling him with a transcendent strength that far surpassed mere physical prowess. He was not merely contending for his own survival, nor was he simply striving to validate his personal might. Rather, he was battling for the fundamental principle that love and goodness ought to possess intrinsic value within the universe, asserting that death should not be permitted to unjustly claim the finest among humanity without facing an arduous and defiant contest. As the first faint hues of dawn began to paint the horizon, Heracles decisively gained the upper hand in their grueling confrontation. His powerful grip on Thanatos tightened irrevocably, and for the very first time in the god's immeasurable eternal existence, Death himself found his formidable will and ancient power utterly overpowered by the sheer, unyielding resolve of a mortal. "Release her," Heracles commanded with an unwavering voice, his hands locked firmly around Thanatos's ethereal throat. "I cannot," Death gasped, his voice strained. "The rules." "Then we will break the rules," Heracles retorted, applying even greater, unyielding pressure. "Some things are infinitely more important than mere rules." And in that singular, pivotal moment, something truly extraordinary transpired. Thanatos, confronted by a mortal whose conviction proved to be more potent and unyielding than even the ancient cosmic law, made a deliberate choice that astonished both himself and his adversary. He yielded. This concession was not born of physical defeat, for gods, by their very nature, cannot be truly annihilated by mortal strength, but rather because Heracles had unequivocally demonstrated a force that even death, in his eternal wisdom, was compelled to respect: the unparalleled power of absolute moral commitment. The hero's audacious willingness to challenge the very foundational order of existence itself, all for the profound sake of love and justice, forged a unique form of authority that utterly transcended all conventional regulations. "Very well," Thanatos conceded, his voice imbued with an ancient weariness, as Heracles finally released his grip. "But understand this unequivocally. This act establishes no precedent. This is a singular, one-time exception granted for an utterly unique situation." Alcestis's sacrifice was of such unblemished purity, and your unwavering commitment to honoring it is so profoundly complete, that the normal, immutable order must bend, if only this once, to acknowledge such extraordinary virtue. With a gesture that visibly cost him considerable ancient effort, Thanatos reached deep into the shadowy folds of his dark cloak and meticulously withdrew a figure, Alcestis herself, ethereal and pale, yet undeniably, miraculously alive. She gazed about her surroundings with an expression of profound confusion, as if gently rousing from an exceptionally vivid dream. "How?" she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "Someone fought for you," Heracles explained with a gentle, reassuring tone. "Someone made the profound decision that your noble sacrifice deserved to be honored with an equally profound and resolute sacrifice." As the golden sun ascended majestically over the ancient crossroads, Heracles meticulously escorted Alcestis back to the city of Pheræ, where her joyous reunion with Admetus swiftly became the very fabric of enduring legend. However, the true victory transcended the mere return of one virtuous woman to the realm of the living. It was, rather, the profound demonstration that unwavering moral conviction, when resolutely supported by the profound willingness to act upon that conviction, possesses the remarkable capacity to sometimes achieve what is otherwise deemed utterly impossible. The compelling narrative of Heracles' epic struggle with death quickly disseminated across the entirety of ancient Greece. Yet its profound implications were interpreted with nuanced diversity by various individuals. Some perceived it as irrefutable proof that the most extraordinary heroes could indeed surmount any conceivable obstacle through sheer, unadulterated determination and indomitable will. Others, however, interpreted the tale as a powerful testament to the notion that even the omnipotent gods, despite their immense power, held a deep reverence for mortals who epitomized the loftiest human virtues. Yet perhaps the most profound and enduring lesson embedded within this timeless myth is considerably more subtle. Heracles did not vanquish death through the singular application of superior physical power. His triumph was secured because his underlying cause was undeniably just, and his personal commitment to it was absolute and unwavering. He engaged in this titanic struggle not for any personal gain or self-aggrandizement, but purely for the upholding of a fundamental principle. He risked his entire existence, not to ensure his own survival, but to honor the profound sacrifice made by another. This distinctive approach stands in stark contrast to all the other methodologies previously observed in mortals' endeavors to challenge death. Sisyphus, for instance, relied heavily upon his cunning intellect and intricate cleverness, yet his actions ultimately served only his own self-interested desires. Alcestis achieved a form of triumph through her ultimate self-sacrifice, but in doing so, she paid the most extreme and final price imaginable. Orpheus skillfully employed the enchanting power of art and music, but was ultimately defeated by his own crippling doubt and lack of faith. Heracles, conversely, succeeded through the sheer force of his moral strength, the unshakable conviction that some fundamental principles are inherently worth battling for, entirely irrespective of the overwhelming odds, coupled with the resolute willingness to actively support that conviction with decisive action. His victory was not merely a personal triumph. It served as a resounding affirmation of the intrinsic value of virtue itself within a universe that frequently appears utterly indifferent to individual human worth. As this illuminating journey through these evocative stories of mortals boldly challenging the dominion of death draws to its conclusion, one has been presented with a diverse array of approaches: cunning cleverness, selfless sacrifice, captivating artistry, and unyielding moral conviction. Each of these distinct methods possesses its own inherent merits. Each has undeniably achieved remarkable feats against formidable odds, and each has concurrently confronted its own inherent limitations. However, perhaps the most profound realization is not about identifying which specific approach is definitively superior. Perhaps, instead, it revolves around the quintessential human refusal to accept that anything is truly, utterly impossible. It speaks to the intrinsic drive to persistently push against the perceived boundaries of limitation, even in the face of seemingly certain failure. Whether manifested through Sisyphus's intricate schemes, Alcestis's boundless love, Orpheus's enchanting music, or Heracles's formidable strength, human beings consistently persist in challenging the very frontiers of existence itself. And in a profound sense, that resolute refusal to accept limitations, that persistent insistence upon dreaming of something inherently better, something more expansive, something far beyond what currently appears possible, might indeed represent the most defining and quintessentially human characteristic of all. One might contemplate which among these various approaches to confronting the impossible resonates most deeply within the human spirit. It is worth reflecting upon what specific limitations within one's own life might profoundly benefit from a touch of mythological stubbornness, that unyielding refusal to accept that circumstances must perpetually remain as they are. Sometimes, the most significant and transformative victories do not stem from absolute success against insurmountable odds, but rather from the sheer, indomitable courage to simply attempt, despite those very odds. After all, every monumental human achievement, every groundbreaking innovation, began with an individual or a collective willing to push against the formidable boulder of impossibility, regardless of whether it ultimately rolled back down or was finally, triumphantly surmounted.